Hello again, everybody, and welcome to a very special supersized edition of the Jim Cornette Experience. Today, I am Jim Cornette, and we will be joined on the telephone as a follow-up to last week's program on the Montreal episode of Dark Side of the Ring on Vice and Montreal in general. Super Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer for an extended conversation that got way out of hand and went all kinds of places, and it's long too. So you're getting a double-length program today to make up for my voice issues and a road schedule over the past few weeks. More for your money, folks. You're not even paying for it. Today, to join me, Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, Mr. Co-host to you, Swammy's Pappy, the post office playboy, the guy who won't call Susie back, the proprietor of the French Toast Chateau, your friend and mine, the great Brian Last.
Aloha, Jim. A pleasure to be here once again. I was hoping you would add Elusive Burger Man to my list of nicknames at the top, or perhaps what did he say about G. Gordon Liddy?
The enigmatic, yet something or other,
resolute.
G. Gordon Liddy. Resolute, G. Gordon Liddy.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here once again with the enigmatic yet resolute Jim Cornette.
Yeah, well, enigmatic, maybe. Jeez. We will have this conversation that we have actually recorded just a couple of days ago. That's how we know how long it is and how great it is with Dave Meltzer, where we not only follow up on Montreal and everything, but also get into wrestling psychology and wrestling history. So it's going to be good for the wrestling nerds out there, aren't we all? But before we go any further, the latest Twitter fiasco, and some people know about this and some don't, and good heavens, I wish I didn't. But we've talked about here on the program a fellow from the Chicago area, Patrick, that's a quadruple amputee, and I met him at C2E2, and great guy, and we've talked about, and he's been on Twitter, and we've talked about him a couple times on the program. So a couple of days ago now, as you hear this for the first time, he tweets a picture of him wearing my Cornette face shirt at the recent WWE event somewhere. But the tweet said, here I am wearing the shirt like 30 minutes before security of the WWE kicked me out for not having a change of shirt and not being able to wear the Jim Cornette shirt. I'm paraphrasing this tweet, but he got kicked out because he had my shirt, no other shirt to wear. They wouldn't give him one. This is what the tweet says. Well, obviously, I get hot immediately because I know Patrick. I've talked to him. He wouldn't say bullshit, right? And it's definitely his account. So I'm like, what the fuck? So, hey, fucking WWE, fuck you. And Patrick, if you'll email me, then I will reimburse you for your tickets, right? Fuck this. That's bullshit, treating a Cult of Cornette member that way. Then Court Bauer, who's never even been known for his charitable contributions to society. No, I'm kidding. He's not that hard-hearted, but he is an executive. But Court chimes in and says, and hey, Pat, I'll give you free tickets to our return to Chicago. And then I come back and say, well, and then I'll have a meet and greet just for you guys in your party, right? So we're trying to make up for this guy who's been wronged and fucked around. Well, then people start picking it up, and then the motherfucking of the WWE begins, and then they're tagging Vince and Shane and Stephanie, and then the goddamn websites, some of them pick it up and start talking about this is heinous. These people, well, they ought to be boiled in oil and have their fat sold for soap. And then, so I do this in the morning, and I don't even know this stuff is happening, how it's snowballing, because I went to Home Depot to buy paint, which is a whole nother story we'll tell another day, the paint story. But when I come back paint in hand, this thing is blown up on Twitter, all this stuff is happening. And then Patrick tweets, but wait, come to find out, yes, it was his account. But while he was in dialysis, because we've also mentioned he had septic shock and his shit shut down. That's the reason he lost his limbs, and he undergoes regular dialysis. Some fucking asshole that was staying with him or his family or somebody gets on his fucking phone and tweets this. He didn't get kicked out. It was a false story. And he's fucking like, what the fuck, when he finds out about it after he gets out of dialysis. And I believe this guy, by the way, because like I said, I've met him and several people have talked to him and it's interacted with him. But once again, before I go any further, Brian Last, it's apparently this easy because I don't do the smartphone thing and don't have one or know how to work it. I tweet from my computer. But it's just easy to get on somebody's phone and basically tweet from them, and that is a written statement from them. Correct? Well, this is how it happens?
You should have some security settings, either a password or a fingerprint that gets you into the phone, or even something.
What is this? Is fucking Lost in Space, Star Trek bullshit with the fingerprint on your face? You do that?
It scans your face now, the new phones.
Wait, my face is trademarked, or soon will be. I'll have you know.
Well, maybe not your face, but it scans the average person's face. But yes, there are security settings that almost everyone, I would think, would have in place so that a stranger or even someone couldn't just jump on your phone and start fucking around.
Well, but it's possible. I get, because I don't know if I would be thinking about, locking up my phone with my fucking fingerprint if I was going into dialysis. I don't, but anyway, I'm verklempt over this whole thing. But I do apologize to anybody that I fucking wrought up unnecessarily. But then, now I'm hearing the next day after this thing that now everybody's going, oh, fuck you, Patrick. I wish you'd die. Well, no, we don't want to fuck Patrick either. Because Patrick says it wasn't his fault, and he's the one that brought it to light that somebody else did this to begin with before anybody else knew. So the point is, I didn't ask anybody to fucking scream at Patrick either. He's gone through enough. But I did tweet, as no good deed goes unpunished, hashtag, or whatever the fuck.
We should test this out, though. Let's see how many Cornette face shirts we can get into a WWE show on camera.
Well, no, I don't even want to make it commercial, for heaven's sake. But several people did say, well, it showed, because I actually was not offended, or was not the offending party in this. For once, I was trying to do something nice for somebody. And so somebody said, well, at least it shows you try to take care of your fans. But fuck, I guess I have to have everything notarized now before everybody wants me to cuss them out for their fucking birthday, right? On Twitter. So now is it next time I say fuck your fucking birthday, is this going to go to some fucking terminally ill child with whooping belch or whatever that's going to be traumatized by this? I'm going to have to stop taking anybody's word for anything unless I hear it coming out of their own little weaselly lips.
Unless you hear that whooping belch come out of their own lips.
You don't like my whooping belches. You edit them out of the program.
I do that for the safety of the listeners out there.
But anyway, all right. So anyway, the whole thing, a major fiasco, but that's what the story was. So everybody leave me alone, leave Patrick alone, and leave other people's fucking telephones alone or whatever happens. See, here's another, I'm very rarely hacked because I have very little interaction with hackable shit. If you can hack my fucking notepad here in front of me right now, it's a high quality legal pad from Office Depot. That's where you get the majority of my goddamn documents. Anyway, but you can see me. We should mention we're going to go to Dave because this is a lengthy and detailed discussions, but we're going to get a couple of commercial plugs in here because we have to, because your chances to see me live are dwindling down this year, folks. This Saturday, April 27th at the Crockett Cup in Concord, North Carolina at the Cabarrus Arena. Not only will I be doing the live broadcast, which is on Fight TV and on traditional pay-per-view through Ring of Honor, and you can pick it up on the fillings in people's teeth. But I'll be doing that with Joe Galley and Ian Riccaboni, but also I will be there as part of the VIP experience with the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, Magnum TA, Nikita Koloff, Tommy Young, and more. So watch us around the world Saturday night. Come see us all day and night Saturday. and then Richmond, Virginia, remember the TMPT Con 3, May 18th. It's going to be a fan fest with me, the Midnight Express, and a whole bunch of folks, and then a VIP Q&A / pizza party / bullshit session with me immediately afterwards. That's on May 18th. You can go to JimCornette and click .com and click on events and see all the websites for these things. Remember, I'm going to be in Milwaukee for the first time in a dog's age. as they used to say, but don't anymore, on Saturday, June 1st for MLW, Major League Wrestling, which you can watch every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on BN Sports. You can watch it on YouTube a few days later. You can see it on Free Sports in the United Kingdom and coming soon to a theater near you. And
what day did you say you were going to be there?
Saturday, June 1st.
Oh, that sucks.
Well, why is that?
Because you're 1 week away. A week later is when they're unveiling the
Crusher.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, actually, and we're planning a feature on that on the MLW program that emanates, that we will tape, as they say, from Milwaukee. So at least I'll get some of the flavor of it. And this is a new deal that we haven't really talked about, but June 6th, right here down the road in Florence, Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati, for you folks who are not Kentucky geographic experts, but it's the Greater Cincinnati area. But the Florence Freedom baseball team will be hosting wrestling night on Thursday night, June 6th, when they take on the Windy City Thunderbolts with myself, Jim Ross, Billy Gunn, and former rocker Marty Jannetty. We got all bases covered there. But JR is the feature attraction, and we're going to carry his bags in the back door. But we're going to do Q&A. We're going to do some stuff for the crowd. We're going to do autograph signings. It's WEBN Thirsty Thursday, presented by Taylor Logistics. Dollar Biller night. Dollar Miller Beer night.
Wow. Start from the beginning again. This is such a wordy promo here. Say this again.
The Florence Freedom, the world famous Florence Freedom baseball team that is competing on Thursday night, June 6th, against the Windy City Thunderbolts, who coincidentally are from Chicago.
And it's
that's
Thirsty
the game.
Thursday?
It's Thirsty Thursday, WEBN Radio Thirsty Thursday. You can get a $1 Miller Lite and Coors Light drafts. I'm just telling you. It's a great deal at me, Jim Ross, Billy Gunn, Marty Jannetty, baseball, autographs, apple pie, and Chevrolet.
Followed by DUI Friday morning court appearance.
Oh, would you quit now? And this is not even the Stephen P. New segue. You're way early. But anyway, June 6th, I'm going to be there at the Florence Freedom game, and we're going to have a nice time, and it's going to be pro wrestling night before you make mockery of the things we do down here at our sporting events. What are you? I mean, you live up there where the polo ponies roam free.
Oh, get out of here. No
for heaven's sake. Or the Peloponnese. Who did that? What would that was a thing that somebody did a voiceover read one time. They read it as Peloponnese.
Speaking of Stephen P. New, Jim, last night, I missed all this stuff that happened on Twitter because I was out and about all day. And Stephen P. New texted me like 11:30 last night, and I didn't know what was going on. And he was legitimately ready to sue someone. I don't even know who, but he was like ready to fight. He takes his position as consigliere to the cult of Cornette very, very seriously. Well, I have to say.
I'm telling you, if Stephen P. New feels that somebody is wronged, it's like having a rabid pit bull with froth coming out of its mouth and snarling and blood in its eyes with a furrowed brow, pulling at a fucking giant chain, a ship's chain, trying to snap free and go after the jugular of whoever has offended his client. That's the first thing off the top of my head that describes Stephen P. New, but I could give it more thought and get back to you.
And that's not just on Thirsty Thursday. That's the way he is every day.
That's every day of the week. He is frothing at the mouth. Anyway, as far as the events go, later on this year, Knoxville, Charlotte, Chicago, we're going to be talking about all summer. And I'm going to be heading in the house early this year. And there's going to be big news in May on several new pieces of merchandise at JimCornette.com. I would suggest that you listen to next week's broadcast for more information on that. And YouTube likes us again. YouTube is compensating us for our hard work and efforts and bringing the programming to the public so we can, with a full-throated endorsement, say, go listen to us on not one, but 2 YouTube channels, correct?
That is correct. Full-length shows, all the current shows right now at the official Jim Cornette YouTube page, tinyurl.com/official corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette, and then classic Jim Cornette clips from past experiences and drive-thrus are available right now at the Arcadian Vanguard video channel, tinyurl.com/corny corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube, search for Jim Cornette. You'll see the full-length shows in one place, the classic clips in another, and go on there and support it. If anyone else is uploading any clips from the podcast that isn't on those channels, fuck those guys and let us know, and we'll really fuck them.
But now, wait a minute. Don't just say go on there and support it. Say invite the people, ask the people, request that the people, if you would please, ladies and gentlemen, because it helps us fight this YouTube demon that occurs from time to time, and they start jacking with us. If we have a lot of subscribers on both the channels, obviously more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. So we request if you would do us the favor, the courtesy of subscribing to both those channels and visiting them often and playing them in the background of your children's weddings and things like that. All right. Before we go to Uncle Dave Meltzer and more excruciating detail on everything you ever wanted to know about wrestling, what are you doing this week on your other 18 broadcasts?
Real quick, Jim, a few notes this week on the Super Studcast for patrons of the Studcast. Part 2, another 90 minutes with Les Thatcher. This is so much fun, and Les takes a conversation places that most people don't take it with Ron. You have to hear this. Again,
that's because they've known each other for 70 years.
They've known each other
Don't tell Les I said that.
49 years, I think it is. But hear this. It is so much fun. Part 1 and 2 are well over 3 hours of a fun reminiscence between the Tennessee Stud and Les Thatcher, all about Southeastern and so much more. Patreon.com/Studcast. Only $2.99 gets you in the door. Check this out. It's one of the best deals in wrestling.
How much did it cost to get in the window?
That depends which window. Depends which window.
And usually when you don't go in by the window, you just leave that way. So go ahead.
Also, this week, coming very soon, a brand new episode of Kentucky Fried Wrestling. The reaction to Howard Baum in the co-host chair has been overwhelming. So he returns once again. Hear what Scott Bowden and Howard have in store for you at KFRpod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. I also want to make mention, next week, right here on The Experience, I will announce how you can subscribe to the brand new John Arezzi Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now podcast, which is coming very, very soon. Next week, information on how to subscribe.
Now, wait a minute. I'm just asking. He's not going to take Weird Al's fucking video store or whatever Russo's video store was called as a sponsor again, is he? He learned that 30 years ago was enough.
We learned, and we won't be doing that. However, we did just hear from a CD warehouse that is looking to hop aboard the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network and jump aboard and sponsor a show, so we may have to see what happens there. But once again, next week here, there'll be no CD warehouses, by the way, on my shows. I don't even think they exist anymore. But next week, more information about that.
Actually, I thought when you said CD warehouse, I thought you meant CDSEEDY, as in shady, potentially criminal. On the shady side of seedy side of seamy side of town, that type of, but either one works.
Well, speaking of CD warehouses, the 605 Superpodcast, the mothership.
See, I'm still saving my vocal cords.
Yeah, still. This week, what, you quit it already. The new show should be out. I think the last couple have come out on Saturday at 6:05, so I think I may try to do that once again. But the next episode in production, Jim, I just had a really fun conversation with someone who you have a history with on the show.
Oh, is it? Wait a minute now. Are we playing What's My Line here, or what's my secret, or
we'll
how many clues do I get?
We'll take a guess, and I'll see what we do.
Well, just guess out of everybody I've ever known or had any dealings with in my life. I'm just going to fucking guess.
You have to narrow it down. You have to ask, is this person
Well, goddamn, how long might this take? Oh, all right, hold on here a second. Is this person bigger than a bread box?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a person? What decade? What decade? Oh, shit. What decade is this person from in my life?
70s. Well, in your life, 1980s.
Would this be a wrestler or another wrestling personality?
It is indeed a wrestler.
All right, I've narrowed it down. And who would you talk to? Who would you talk to? I don't fucking know.
Cowboy Scott Casey rides on to the 605 Super Podcast in his beautiful green coat to talk all about everything in his career. We finally put to rest. Is it true that he gave up the world of wrestling for a lucrative career as a gigolo? We find out. We ask the tough questions about that and Santo Gold's Blood Circus, and so much more. The 605 Super Podcast, 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts.
But wait, the burningest question of all the burning questions is, what did he do with the green jacket?
You know, I forgot to ask him.
Oh, for God's sake. Seriously, you talked to Scott Casey after all these years, and you don't ask him about the green jacket.
He said he thought it was blue.
Oh, for fuck's sake. No, here's the fuck. For people who think, what the fuck are they talking about? Here's the fucking deal. At the Dallas Sportatorium one night, they were doing the world-class syndicated television program, and it just so happened that the Midnight Express was working with, or somehow I don't even know if it was the Midnight. I can't remember. I just remember the actual incident, but Scott Casey was one of the baby faces, and maybe it was me with managing Rip Oliver, or me with the Midnight, and Scott had a partner. Sunshine may have been involved, whatever the fuck, but just... they almost got a hold of me. We're just doing we did the finish, and then the baby faces are going to chase us out of the ring. And just to make it a little more dramatic, Scott almost gets his hands on me, grabs the back of my jacket, and I'm wiggling free, and we're milking it like, is he going to get me? And the boys are pulling me out or whatever the fuck, and I escape, and he's got my suit jacket, my green, looked like I won the fucking Masters golf tournament suit jacket, in his hands. And that was the way we went to commercial. It wasn't something that was booked or called beforehand. It's just one of those things that happened. But then, of course, because we did, all these long interviews the next week on the Fort Worth TV, I came out and cut this big, long promo about how mad I was that Scott Casey had assaulted me and stole the jacket that I won at the Masters, right? And all this bullshit. And Scott Casey said, if you want your didn't say goddamn jacket, then you can come and get it at, in Fort Worth next Monday or whatever the fuck. We just did our own shit. And for the past, that was in 1985. And it never really went anywhere because since the booker, Ken Mantell, it wasn't his shit. He didn't give a fuck, right? So he didn't suddenly book a jacket on a pole match. So it was just a bone of contention that we had when we were opposite each other for a while that we did on our own. But because it got that on the world-class syndicated television, and then it was shown on ESPN when World Class was there, and then it was a blah, 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 and all the reruns. For the past 30 years, people have asked me about that fucking green jacket almost more than anything else we ever did in World Class. And to the point where this past month in West Virginia, a guy brought a green blazer, the exact same brand that I used to wear, and said that he got it in some fucking thrift shop in Pennsylvania or whatever. And could it be the one? And I put it on, and it was a little snug. And I'm probably about 10 pounds heavier than I was in World. Well, maybe not even, but I'm distributed a little differently than I was 30 years ago. So it was, I don't, but it's taken on a life of its own. And for whatever reason.
605pod.com.
Well, thank God that's over. Anyway, all right, let's go to this long and interesting talk with Dave Meltzer. It's a follow-up on the episode we did on Dark Side of the Ring on Vice this past week on the Montreal situation. We want to remind everybody, if you're not already DVR Dark Side of the Ring, you've missed the one on Bruiser Brody by the time you hear this, if you're not DVRing it, which is a harrowing piece of business. And next week, I believe, is the Von Erichs. Am I correct in the order?
May 1st is the Von Erichs. So
yes, May 1st. And this may be the best of the bunch of them. And you've never heard Kevin Von Erich this way. So anyway, by the way, I did hear that the Montreal episode got the highest ratings, counting I don't know what the combined number, I don't know what the exact term is, but the live viewership, repeat, and DVR the show in quite some time. So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to reveal now that I'm revealing that, but it was a big jump. And the thing is, I don't think it matters who the personalities are that are profiled, because the people are seeing that these are just some cool television shows about wrestling. So if you like wrestling, and it's accessible to people who aren't experts and just have a passing knowledge, as well as, the experts, if they can get over not reading the whole Warren Commission report, they're cool programs. Anyway, so watch those every Wednesday night and tape them. If you can't, I can't not say tape shit anymore, right? It's still a terminology, right? They know what I mean, even though there's no tape involved.
DVR it and get ready for next season when they come back with the brand new series. Jim Cornette dances on the grave of his enemy. Each week we go to a different cemetery and Jim finds someone that he hates. Jim Hurd, well, he's not dead yet, but maybe he will be.
We can hope.
Urine will fly next season on Viceland.
This season is mine and next one is urine. All right. Anyway, let's go to Uncle Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer, the conversation we had a few days ago. I think we do a close, but if we don't at the end of it, everybody, thank you for listening and keep listening for the next couple of hours because it's going to be fun. Bye. Well, folks, at this point, there's been all kinds of controversy over last week's episode of Dark Side of the Ring on Vice TV about the Montreal screw job and who knew what and who didn't and my revelations, and Harley Quinn even got a thank you in the credits. We appreciate that, guys. But also, we wanted to bring in probably the guy who knows more about this from all sides than anybody else in or outside of wrestling. He is, of course, the editor, publisher, creator, originator of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and he is a savant when it comes to wrestling details, and that's why we have him here today. Dave Meltzer, thank you, Dave, for being on this program.
Oh yeah, thanks. I listened to your show on it. It was absolutely fascinating. I mean, the whole thing with Montreal is that if you're like a fan in 2019 and you look at this and it's like there's like 50 things that will just boggle your mind about it. Like, how could this happen? Why would this happen? And it's like, but in 1997, it wasn't that weird. And if it was the 70s, it wouldn't be the slightest bit weird because, as you know, and you talked about, it's like one of the keys to why this happened was because of the value of that championship and what it meant to Vince McMahon and what it meant to Bret Hart and what it meant to everybody in the industry. And now it's, the championship, it still means a lot, but it's not in the same way. I mean, it's passed around. Everybody gets a shot, so to speak. In those days, I mean, you could count on your hands the number of real world champions that there were. And those guys are all, every one of them is like practically a surefire Hall of Famer. If you held that title, whether it was WWF, if you held the championship, Bruno Sammartino or Backlund, I mean, you could name the guys off the top of your head that held it, right? And then on the NWA side, it was the same thing. You could. Oh, you knew the dates. You knew the dates they won it and the dates they lost it. Right. You could do the lineage from Thez on, I wouldn't say any fan, but any historian would trace, Thez to, Watson to Thez to Hutton to, that whole line. They could do it and easily. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. We got to say this to top of the program. And we mentioned this last week here on the show. Also, it was a 45-minute television program and you can't do this has been covered like the Kennedy assassination. You did, I don't know how many issues on it for weeks afterwards. And you can't do all the details and the dates and the places and the contracts and et cetera in a 45-minute television program without commercials. But it was an overall view of how important the backstage manipulations and meanderings were in wrestling, how important the championship was, the length that people would go to especially in that promotional war. But it also shows that basically wrestling, there have been some cliches or some, the platitudes in wrestling. Well, exposés are bad. This is bad. That's bad. It always came from something. The reason why, and I remember this story, and then we'll talk about the show here in a second, but when Chris Candido won the NWA title in 1995, right? Mm-hmm. He actually ran into, by accident, Lou Thez in an airport bathroom. And he was so excited. And he told me about it as soon as he got back to Knoxville. He said, I ran into Lou Thez. He said, I went up, I introduced myself, and Mr. Thez, it's so great to meet you, sir. I'm a wrestler, and blah, blah, blah. And Lou had asked him, well, what are you doing? And he was almost like not wanting to really say this, right? But he had to. He's like, well, currently, sir, I'm the NWA world champion.
And the thing that Thez told him was, well, be careful, kid. When you go around to these different territories, somebody's going to try to double cross you.
Yeah.
And in 1990 something, even that was, we kind of chuckled about it, but that's because there were so many double crosses in the formative years of wrestling. I think I tweeted not so long ago that how many from 1905 to 1945, how many world title changes were legitimate double crosses? A decent percentage.
Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I would think 6 or 7. And I mean, certainly the whole, in many ways, if you look at the real history of wrestling in that era, a lot of the double crosses, were kind of like the formation, the formative, stuff of history, like with the Wayne Munn and, Zbyszko and the She-Cat and Dan O'Mahony. Those were like major switches, I mean, they changed history. So, in a lot of ways. And I mean, the whole history, if you look at the narrative of how history was shaped, well, not every world title change was a double cross. Those double crosses changed so much about how the history in the 20s and 30s in particular, because really most of that stuff was the 20s and 30s, how it changed, and also why even as late as Jack Briscoe, I remember when I don't know if you know the story, when Jack Briscoe won the world title from Harley Race, so this is 73, Don Owens wrote a letter to Sam Mushnick, goes, thank God, and not that Harley Race wasn't a tough guy, he goes, but thank God we've got a champion who's like a real wrestler. We don't have to worry about double crosses. I mean, even though Dory Funk Jr. was a real tough guy and Harley Race was a real tough guy, you know what I mean? It was but like all of those guys again that we talked about, Kiniski, who was a really tough guy. It's like Lou Thez. Like one of the things of being a world champion is that, yeah, you had to be a great athlete and a real tough guy and a guy that, that someone's not going to manipulate into a submission hold so easy. I mean, that was one of the prerequisites of being the champion, really through Harley Race, I would say.
Yeah, through the 70s. And going back to the second Gotch and Hackenschmidt match, it was technically a double cross, even though Gotch was always supposed to win. Hackenschmidt got hurt, shady circumstances. They couldn't cancel the match because it was going to be the all-time record gate. And so Gotch agrees, well, I tell you what, we'll go 2 out of 3. I'll carry you to a good showing before I win the third fall. And that was the agreement to get him in the ring. And then he shut him down in 2 straight falls and ate him up and killed Hackenschmidt's career. Same way when they double crossed, She-Cat double crossed O'Mahony because O'Mahony wasn't a real wrestler. It killed the biggest draw in the business, Gus Sonnenberg. When that happened, he was huge.
Yeah, if you look back at O'Mahony for those 2 years before She-Cat beat him, I mean, he was one of the biggest short-term drawing cards in the history of wrestling. He was doing stadiums, especially in Boston. He was doing stadiums in Boston and doing 35,000 people all the time. And he was only a young guy. He was in his early 20s, when the 21, 22 years old was going on. I mean, he could have been it, but the problem was that he couldn't wrestle. I mean, he wasn't a good performer and he couldn't wrestle. But for whatever reason, you know how this goes. I mean, he had the charisma and he had the look. And people
Irish in Boston,
he was a world beater. Yeah, what?
Irish in Boston. That didn't hurt.
Irish in Boston, but he drew outside of Boston too. But Boston, he was like the king.
Yeah.
And then She-Cat double crossed him, and yet it pretty much exposed him, and people wouldn't buy him after that because of how badly he was double crossed. I mean, how badly he looked in the double cross. And then She-Cat pretty much lost his mind because he just realized what he did and needed to get that belt off because someone was going to kill him. So people actually will point to the She-Cat O'Mahony match for ending what in fact had been several years of a boom period. Because if you look at those early 30s, even though there was the Depression and everything, like with Londos and Lewis and O'Mahony and people like that, that was a real big period for pro wrestling. And then because of the She-Cat thing, it came out, in the papers and in the media that in fact, wrestling was worked and She-Cat whatever, but She-Cat double crossed Mahoney, and then O'Mahony was a terrible wrestler, which came out, which killed O'Mahony, and also it really killed the popularity of the business. Of all the double crosses, that one probably killed the popularity of the business the most.
Well, and that's the thing. Even when I was getting in the business and being smartened up in the 70s and in early 80s, these were still the rules of thumb because it had had such impact on the business years before. If you're a world champion, watch out for double crosses. Exposés of the business will kill the business because the biggest expose had been in the 30s in New York, the New York papers. For 25 years after that, savaged wrestling. And there was no wrestling in Madison Square Garden from 1939 to 1951. And the only way they got it back, if you go and look at this for a recent article I did in Fighting Spirit magazine, it was more obvious to me. And I realized New York came back in the early 50s on the back of Argentina Rocca, because Thez didn't draw, Gagne didn't draw, Rocca drew, then Bruno drew.
Rocca and Gene Stanley was the big one. But
it was here's where I was going with that. It was the ethnic hero, the formula that they found, because think about this. Even in those days in New York, there were Italian newspapers. There were Spanish language newspapers. The English language, the major New York papers were still ripping the shit out of phony wrestling, but they managed to bypass that publicity somewhat by having the ethnic heroes that their fans were not reading the New York Times. And I think there's something to, and remember all the times that the WWF television was on the Spanish language TV stations. Yeah. They managed to bypass that bad publicity, and that's why it led to, for 40 years, they were led by an ethnic hero, because that was what finally worked after wrestling had been dead because of the exposés. And back then, before the internet, there was no way to really do a national expose, and unless somebody had time, right? So I'm going to put this on the Associated Press, is going to go everywhere. So pockets of the country where the business would be exposed, business would go down, and henceforth it was the rule of thumb. World champions, watch out for double crosses. If the newspapers expose our business, we're going to be dead. We have to. Those were all the things that were, rules of thumb in wrestling, because they were rooted in those things actually happening years and years before.
It's interesting because Madison Square Garden went dark for wrestling for several years, as you mentioned. The first show back was actually Gorgeous George on top, because Gorgeous George was so big on television, and Gorgeous George was drawing everywhere. And then Gorgeous George came to the Garden, and it got a lot of publicity because it was Gorgeous George, who was one of the biggest stars of television at the time. And I forget the number, but it was like
4,000 people. 4,000 people.
He drew a terrible house in Madison Square Garden. And then they didn't do another show until Rocca and Stanley. And then Rocca and Stanley did almost like 18,000 people. And that started the Rocca era for like probably the next, whatever it was, 9 years, where Rocca was on top, and Rocca drew, he drew good to great every single show. But, like you said, like Thez didn't draw on top at all. And George, it's like George was drawn everywhere, and George didn't draw in New York.
If you go back and look at the newspaper articles, when the newspapers announced wrestling coming back to the Garden and Gorgeous George, they were just taking the piss out of Gorgeous. They took the piss out of everything that wrestling did.
Made fun of him.
Yeah. Until when they were selling out and turning people away, then they would still make the backhand comments like, well, the show, or the hippodroming, or, the vaudeville or whatever, but they had to acknowledge the huge crowds. But it was a rocky road there, because that expose in the 30s is what led to the Fall Guys, which thank goodness, that book was printed once and then reprinted 60 years later by Scott Teal, which we're going to talk about a little bit. Scott Teal has a part to play in this, as we all know now. But that's the thing, is that everybody today laughs at all the things that the wrestlers and the wrestling promoters used to believe 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, but those things were rooted in reality. They had happened, and they didn't want them to happen again.
For the time, that was what it was. Yeah. But yeah, like going back to George, I remember when George was in the Garden, I remember the articles after. I mean, it was the papers kind of even were gloating like, well, the George stuff may play in Los Angeles big, but here in New York, we're way too sophisticated for this stuff.
Yeah.
I remember that tone, like it didn't work he couldn't work but George really worked just about everywhere but New York. That was like the only place, because George was an incredible draw for for that 2-3 year period.
Yeah, and then when Rocca hit so big, and then when he started cooling off, they brought in Miguel Perez. They made him his partner so that they had a different dynamic, but it was still the Puerto Rican and the Italian and the Hispanic audience. And then immediately went to Bruno. It was for 30 years you had to
and Pedro Morales,
and in Morales, yeah, and in Bruno again for 30 something years you had to have the ethnic hero. And part of it obviously is because Bruno was a once in a lifetime talent, but part of it was because that was the way they were able to rebuild the business after the media just wanted nothing to fucking do with it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, with Bruno in the second run, I think by that point,
that got past it. Yeah.
But by that point, I mean, Bruno was just like a sports legend that everyone, like across all ethnic boundaries, loved Bruno. I mean, he drew everywhere. As far as the Northeast, because he was like he became a sports legend on the second run. Like the first run when he was coming up, I do believe because the audience had changed too. It was like because they said like the audience that went within 2-3 years the Rocca fans were gone, and it was the Bruno fans, and Bruno drew his own unique fans, and then and it was the Italian. Bruno at first was the Italian sports hero, but in time, Bruno became the hero to the downtrodden, but to everyone, even rich people. You know what I mean? It's like Bruno was like that part of your life. Like every month you knew he's going to go there and he was going to kick ass, and he would never disappoint you. Even if he lost, he would get it. He would win back in the rematch, and it was a fantastic formula for its time.
Well, let's talk about the program from this past week. And I mentioned that it's 45-minute programs. They couldn't put all the details in. And obviously there's things, obviously Scott Hall either just wanted to be in it, so he said that, or he legitimately believes it, in which case his brain is mush. And that's 30 seconds or a minute that could have been, utilized for something more positive. But some people were criticizing the program. Some people loved the program. Some people were in the middle. What were your thoughts, first of all, before we go any further?
Well, here's the funny thing, because I had been told several reporters actually had seen it before I did. And so they hated it. They absolutely hated it. So, and one of my best friends saw it, and he was kind of telling me about it as well. And so I went in there with the idea that I'm going to hate it. And I think because of that, I didn't hate it. You know what I mean? Because I was already told, okay, this isn't in, and this isn't in, this isn't in, and this is the way it's portrayed. And it's like, okay, I know that. So then, I enjoyed most of it. I thought that the idea that, as one of the things of that movie was that, and the same with Wrestling with Shadows too, is it created the idea that it was Brett's last night with the promotion. So Vince had no, he had to either get the belt off him or not. And it really, I think the one thing is that Brett still had 3 weeks left on his contract, and then he still had another week that Bischoff had allowed him to stay one extra week if you need to, so you could go out the right way.
The December pay-per-view and do a 4-way.
The December pay-per-view were the 4-way thing. So it was like, it's like there's that the art. If it was Brett's last night, absolutely his last night. You're in a war and all this, and Brett's not going to lose. There is a justification for what Vince did. But and that's been almost historically that's the one fact that people go, but and it's mostly from Wrestling with Shadows. It's like it was his last night. What choice did Vince have? And it was like, well, it was his last night because he double crossed him and Brett wouldn't come back, and they both knew that was after it happened. This was going to be his last night. But his contract. He had another 3 to 4 weeks to go, and also. The thing that Bruce said at the very beginning, and Bruce actually told me this the day after, so I believe Bruce believed that and knew that and was told it from Vince, was, Brett wouldn't do the job on the way out. He just refused every scenario. And he did it, he refused every scenario but one.
Yeah.
to lose to Shawn Michaels. And there's no doubt that was, that losing to Shawn Michaels was a huge issue. But I mean, I like I said, I've seen, some of the legal papers that went back and forth between Bret's lawyer and Vince as they're negotiating a finish because of the creative control aspect. They had to negotiate a finish. And I mean, Bret legitimately brought up in one of the letters, it was like, because of everything that's happened with me and Shawn, I'd rather not lose to Shawn, but I would love, I don't think he used the word love, but it was like, it would be my honor or something.
Yeah.
He'd be very happy to lose to Steve Austin on any day, anytime. I don't want to lose in Canada. I'll lose in the United States. He was protective of losing in Canada. And people make fun of that, but he had his reasons. And the fact is that aside from those 3 days, the whole month was in the United States. There was a Madison Square Garden. There's a Raw taping in Greensboro. And if he wanted to do it on pay-per-view, he could have done it on the pay-per-view.
Well, now I gotta bring this up because that weekend Detroit was in the middle of Toronto and Montreal, and then he said, "Well, I don't want to lose in Detroit because then it would screw the people in Montreal out of seeing the title match that was advertised." And to be honest, he never should. Here's the thing. The whole reason why he wouldn't do a job for Shawn, he was justified because they didn't explain it quite well or the way it was edited in the program, but where he went up to Shawn and shook his hand and said, "I want you to know I'll always be safe and blah, blah, blah with you, or you'll always be safe with me." The point is, he had gone up to Shawn and said something of that nature and that, I'll be professional, I'll put you over, whatever. And then Shawn's line was, and help me on this if this is not correct, but basically Shawn's line was, "Well, that's great of you because I wouldn't put you over for $1 million," or something like, well, what the fuck?
It was like, it's really nice, but if the situation was reversed, I wouldn't return the favor. But he did that 2 or 3 times and once, here's the other one. Once was in San Jose, and I was out with a wrestler for dinner after a show, and it was one of Bret's friends, and he's just furious, not even talking. He's just steaming, like he's going to kill somebody. And then finally, like his dad who was there, and his dad was just like, what's going on? And then he goes, "You can't print this, to me." And he goes, he tells me the story, and he was there. And Bret and Shawn are talking, and somehow in the conversation, Shawn goes kind of making it's just like a smart ass remark, and he just went to Bret and just goes, "I'll never put you over. I'll just never put you over." Yeah. And the guy was friends with Bret. Bret was at the time the champion. But it wasn't the conversation that you're talking about. So there was at least 2, and there might have been 3 conversations like that where Shawn was just kind of mocking Bret, like, you're working a full-time schedule and I'm not, and I'm, in the main events on the pay-per-view, even though you're the champion, some of which he actually said on interviews. But that specific one was like, I'm never going to put you over, which may have stemmed from him missing the WrestleMania show. Because if you remember, WrestleMania was supposed to be Bret and Shawn, and then Shawn had the knee injury. And
97.
As fate would turn out, it turned out to be Bret and Austin, which is one of the most important matches in the history of pro wrestling, because it's
one of the best
for Austin.
Yeah, and one of the best matches too. And here's the thing that I had told the Vice people, and it didn't get in really as it should. And we said this on a program last week. Vince McMahon and everybody else trusted Bret that he wasn't going to, it had already been litigated. You couldn't take a belt on somebody else's TV, intellectual property. He wasn't going to throw the belt in the garbage can. He wasn't going to show up on TV if he said he wasn't going to show up. Bret was good for his word, but the bone of contention that I think in Vince McMahon's mind eventually led to doing this was, back in those days, very limited internet, if any. The only way to get the news out to any mainstream audience, not just the newsletter fans or the people who called each other on the phone, was live television. Vince was going to be live at the Survivor Series in Montreal on Sunday. Bischoff, this was because it was the Wednesday where we were sitting having this writing session when he was taking all the phone calls from Bret and Shawn. The next time that Eric Bischoff or WCW would be live would be Monday. Nobody ever thought, and that's where people have taken this thing and run with it. Vince McMahon and nobody else thought that Bret was going to show up on TV the next day. He wasn't contractually able to, nor would he, blah, blah, blah.
He'd never done it anyway.
But What was preventing Eric Bischoff from coming out and announcing, ladies and gentlemen, I have signed the current WWF champion, Bret Hart, and he's going to be here in 30 days. Not trusting Eric Bischoff, because the question was put to Vince McMahon. We trust Bret. Do you trust Eric Bischoff with your fucking company? And in effect, if he had come out and said, we've signed the champion, he'll be here in 30 days, then that was, as I said on the program, was the equivalent of, fucking Vince's wife in front of him on television, or, emasculating him. It was, that's how important it was at that time. And if they'd announced Bret Hart will be here the day after he lost the belt, okay, the guy lost the belt, now he's going to the other place, right? That was more palatable. But signing away a current world champion had never been done and was not going to be done.
Yeah. The only thing I could say about that is that Bret had signed prior to that, the Monday before. So Eric actually had a Monday, because people have brought this up. Eric had a Monday where he could have said, we've signed Bret Hart, and he didn't. Now, that's not saying he wouldn't the next week. And again, in this one, really.
Well, a lot happened in that last week also.
Right. And also during that week, while it was not a big story in the United States, it was in Canada, because Bret was in two things in Canada. Number one is that the mainstream media covered pro wrestling so much better than in the United States, just because of, history, because of Montreal and Toronto with the Tunnies and everything, where the stigma of pro wrestling in Montreal and Toronto and Calgary as well, in the major markets of Canada, was not like the United States. So wrestling was like I remember when I wrote my first book, it was like I could do any talk show in Canada. I couldn't do nothing in the United States, because it is wrestling. Whereas in Canada, it's, you're writing a book on wrestling. That's so cool. And real media would cover you. And by the middle of the week, the Bret stuff had broken, and I mean, it was covered in the sports, and a lot of the newspapers, had stuff about, not so much the newspapers, but there was some newspaper, but a lot of the TSN and everything like that off the record. I remember Off the Record, which was a big show then.
Yeah, Landsberg, Alan Landsberg. Yeah.
Michael Landsberg told everyone that Bret's going to WCW, and not it's about the championship, that he's going to WCW. And this was before the Montreal match. And I remember Bret was even on a show, and he wouldn't, Bret wouldn't admit to it because that would be wrong for business, but it was like he didn't deny it either, because he didn't want to lie. So he kind of, traipsed his way around it. And then when the show was over, I remember when the interview was over, Michael Landsberg goes, well, I think that, Bret's going to WCW, just like it's,
yeah.
So there were people who knew in Canada already about that. But, again, it was a very tense situation. I don't think people really understood the nature of the war. And now you couldn't, because, there's rivalries, but it was never like this was a real, with both sides. This was kind of like a weird life and death rivalry. They both, I think there was some.
Well, there was tens of millions of dollars. Even at that point, everybody talks about the economics of today, but there were tens of millions of dollars on the line on this thing. Not just in salary to the wrestlers, but also in revenue to the company, to the companies. And hey, help me with this, because this may come as a shock to everybody, but I don't listen to Eric Bischoff's podcast. But what has I've heard that recently he's been saying that he didn't offer Bret a contract when he did, and then he help me say what is he trying to say now, because everybody knows what happened then, and we can repeat it. What's he saying now?
I don't know. I think that he, because Eric doesn't like Bret because Bret trashes him constantly because of the creative when he got there, and for good reason. I mean, they shit the bed on the hottest wrestler in the world. Yeah, I mean the weird thing, because people, here's the one, and this has even happened a lot in the last week. Now, this is the one that's the weirdest of all. Okay, was that? Did you hear about the interview Earl Hebner did just this week with Bully Ray?
I actually did not, because, and I'd like to apologize to the Busted Open people here on the air, because they contacted me through email to see if I wanted to do that show also, and I had no voice, and I was not looking at emails, and so I didn't do it. But I apologize for that. But did Earl say something the effect of, well, now both of them were in on it?
Yeah. Okay, so it was weird because Earl goes in and they go like, Earl, do you think it's a work? And he just goes, for 20 years I've been thinking about it, and yeah, like that. Like not definitive, but like, yeah, I think. And then you think Brett and Sean are in on it. He goes, well, I know, he just goes, I'm positive Sean's in on it. It's like, well, duh. Yeah. Sean's admitted that, so that's not a big deal. And he goes, then they go, do you think Brett was in on it? And he goes, yeah. And I go like, what? I mean, it's like, if Brett, why would they do that to you? Why would, like of all people, and plus the fact that Brett wouldn't speak to Earl for God knows how many years.
Yeah.
And they were friends. And, and then when, making up and all this, and it's like, of all the people, it's like, I can sort of understand some fans, thinking that everything's, a work in pro wrestling, thinking it's a work. But like Earl Hebner and guys and some of the guys in the business today now that weren't around in 97, I can sort of see them watching Wrestling with Shadows and go, oh, it fits too well. I can't. But if you were actually around then,
I gotta be honest with Earl, and I love Baby Earl. I think he might be trying to maybe take some of the heat off himself now, because here's the thing, and I'm not trying to tell tales out of school, but I was told that when they interviewed him for this Vice piece, that he had to meet them at a neutral location because he at first didn't believe it was really a TV documentary crew. He thought somebody was trying to set him up and beat him up over what he did 20. I swear, yes. Because it's been a soft spot or a touchy spot with Earl, because he really was caught between a rock and a hard place, because they snatched him right beforehand and said, hey, you want a fucking job. And that's, he knew he couldn't go in the other direction because there was heat from, the years before when he left to do the twin referee thing. Anyway, and let me ask you this. So back to Bischoff. Bischoff is saying that obviously he offered Brett a contract because Brett signed it and came, but is he saying he didn't offer him a contract earlier in 96?
It was 96, the one he claimed he never offered him the contract in 96. That story, he claimed that which there was just a total fallacy. He said that Bret Hart and Barry Bloom worked me so he could get a better deal with Vince, which was ludicrous because, as you probably know, and a lot of people know, and it's actually in his book, like Bret and I did not get along. Bret didn't want to talk to me after that. He was told by, a couple of people that were close to him, you're going to have to talk to Dave about this. And he did. The Tuesday after Montreal, we had a long conversation. We ended up being, friends, and pretty good friends. When my mom had a stroke, he was like the first person to reach out and just goes, I heard about your mom, and just remember you've got a friend who, had a stroke and is like the spokesperson for strokes in Canada. So if you ever need anything, so, I mean, but the point is like we, for a variety of reasons, and one of them was that his dad really, and his mom loved the Observer, and he just, for whatever reasons, he thought he was, I mean, there's reasons. Bret didn't like me at the time. And Barry Bloom, I know Barry Bloom, but I never talked to Barry Bloom about that business. And I mean, again, you were around.
Here's the thing.
Everyone in the business knew the story.
We knew as soon as it happened, because Bret had taken off after WrestleMania. He put Michaels over the Iron Man match, and then he took off, do Lonesome Dove and do acting, and his contract expired. And also he was waiting to see Michaels twisting in the wind, either a flop at the box office or having a mental meltdown as champion, which that did happen. So that he could come back and say, okay, Vince, you should have known, but I told you so. And here we go. And now we'll do business again. Well, then once again, we heard, because in the writing meetings, and this was before Russo even came along, when it was me and Bruce, that's what Vince said. Well, they've offered Bret pretty close to $3 million per year.
Exactly what the number was.
Yeah, I saw the paperwork because Vince had a copy of it and knew it was legitimate. And that's when Vince came up with the idea, I can't match $3 million a year, but I can sign him for 20 years with good money for a couple of years as a wrestler. And then as a goodwill ambassador and creative something with the company, he'd make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for 20 years. And because Brett wanted to stay loyal, that's what he signed. And then that's what made me start tearing my hair out of my head when in 97, then Russo had come along, and for a while the team was me and Bruce and Russo. And then toward the end of the year, as I mentioned, then Bruce was back in the office and it was just me and Russo. But then Vince is saying, well, I'm going to have to renege on Brett's contract. I'm going to see if he can get the deal back with Bischoff. And my tongue just fucking hit the floor. And that's what they wrote some clause, and Vince was trying to help Brett work Bischoff then, because Vince did say that he didn't want Brett to say that Vince is reneging on the contract. He wanted to say that I have a clause after the first year or whatever. However, they wrote a clause in there that Brett could show Bischoff saying that I have the power at this time for a 30 or 60 day window or whatever it was to negotiate. Are you still interested? And see if he can get that same deal back. That's exactly what fucking happened. And I don't know how anybody can say it didn't happen, since it was common knowledge at the time.
And the fact that until this last year, for decades, Eric had said the same thing.
Well, it helps when the guy who said one thing
that Eric had
another.
Eric had tried to get Brett. He even said like the one thing that he really tried that he couldn't was get Brett the first time. And I would say 9 wrestlers out of 10 would have gone to WCW in '96 because the money was so much better.
Yeah,
and the travel was better too. So, but Brett, I think that Brett kind of knew that in WWF he was a legend and he was always going to be, used well. And as even though he had his ups and downs with Vince, I think he always had confidence in Vince, and he didn't know the other side at all. And
and he could kind of smell that they didn't know what they were doing and that they were just spending, a lot of Turner money.
When he got there, it was pretty quick where he figured that out. That they had no direction. I mean, I can remember pretty quick, kind of like a lot of frustration. I would watch, and I mean, again, when Brett showed up, Brett was the hottest guy in the business when he showed up there, and there were so many mistakes made and impatience and they would have an idea for 3 weeks and then they would go, this isn't working.
Well, besides, I loved when they showed the footage where the hottest wrestler in the business, coming off the hottest, most controversial finish of all time, and they bring him down the aisle to be a special referee. And you could just see him, what the fuck? It was on his face, and it was so stupid. And you should have been in on a few of the fucking WWF production meetings at that point when we were scoff laughing at this is what they're doing with the hottest guy in the business that they're paying $3 million a year to. But anyway,
what was so funny was at that time, we go to November 1997, okay, and WCW was winning. WCW's ratings were bigger. WCW was hot. The Hulk Hogan Sting match, you've got to remember, was the month away, and that was the biggest match they would ever do. It was the hottest program they ever had. Hogan Goldberg could have been hotter, but that's another story of whatever. But it was the hottest match in the history of the company. Was coming up. They were on fire, and then you guys, WWF, just lost Bret Hart, who was, you could argue there's probably 3 guys, Bret, Shawn, and Undertaker, who were the top 3 guys at the time. And I don't want to say who was bigger, but, I think Bret may have been number 1, maybe some people would, but whatever. They'd lost one of their top guys at a time when they'd already lost Hall and Nash, and Hulk Hogan was there, and so many other guys had switched. And it was like all the momentum. It was like, I thought not the death knell of WWE, but I know you would have to at the time be kind of concerned. We lost another top guy to them while we're losing. And I thought oh my God, Vince is really gonna, I thought now Vince is actually, because even when WCW was ahead in 97, I never thought WCW was going to win because I just, Vince had been around for so long, you just don't think. And then at that point I go, Vince may actually lose this fight. I mean, I actually kind of was thinking that, plus the way it all happened, because Vince looked so bad. And it's like, how do you trust Vince? But then within 2 months, it was, between WWF had better television, and then Tyson came and the DX.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. When you think about it, in 3 months, they botched Bret Hart. They botched the Hogan Sting match. So it's, Sting never recovered. And we got Tyson. And Tyson made Austin. Austin was so hot off of that Fresno angle and thing. I remember watching that watching the thing with Austin and Tyson going like, okay, it's turned around now because Steve Austin is so freaking hot, like nobody we've ever seen since Hogan. And at that point, it took a couple of months. It didn't happen overnight, but within a couple of months, then the ratings turned around. And by the time the ratings turned around, it was like, there's no going back because these other guys are self-destructing. And the only reason they didn't self-destruct harder in 98 was because Bill Goldberg, they lucked into Bill Goldberg, who got so ridiculously hot. And that was, I love all the people, who claim credit for that, because I can tell you, because I was on the conversation, that the Bill Goldberg winning streak and all that stuff, that idea was Mike Tenay. I was about to say that was the professor, right? That was my brother, the other sharp brother.
Tenay. I've heard 50 people take credit for it. And it's like, I was on the phone with Mike Tenay when he calls me up and he just pitches this idea to me, about Bill Goldberg had probably won 30 matches in a row, and Bill was starting to get hot, but he wasn't anywhere close to what he would end up being. Because, Bill's getting hot. How about this idea of a winning streak? And we do it legit, the numbers legit. And he called me up. And the reason he called me up for it was because he wanted me to go through the records. So when they started the next week on TV, the number would be the real number. And so we went back, and whatever the number was the first week they mentioned the streak, that was a real number. And every week it was a real number. And as it got to 75 or so, and up through 100, Bill was on fire. And, watching Bill do those 2-minute, 90-second squashes, would just boosted the ratings of Nitro, and they were neck and neck with WWF for a while until WWF started taking over. And then they, people will have a different opinion, but I mean, my opinion was they got so carried away, and it's pro wrestling, that they started lying about Bill's number. And people would bring signs because this is already the internet age. So they've got, so people know, okay, he worked 3 house show matches, so his number's higher than 3 from the last one. So they come in and they have the number. And then they start just faking the number. So the signs stopped because those people who would make the signs, knew it was fake by this
point. Nothing jive.
Right. And it's like, why do you need, you got this thing. This is why it's working, because it was real, so to speak. The number was real anyway. And it's like, why do you then have to make those fans go that you lied? And then they start pumping in the Goldberg stuff in the building, which you didn't have to do because they were doing it anyway. And then you go to the building and they're pumping in the Goldberg, so that makes it fake too. So then Goldberg started getting uncool, and that's when they really started hitting.
Well, and then Hogan wanted to main event to Georgia Dome in front of 40,000 people, and here you go.
Yeah, but that helped actually because Hogan put him over. But then what killed it was that there was never, you had Hogan and Goldberg, the hottest match that they ever had, with the advance was already 30,000, and that's why Hogan was, wanted to put him over, was because he could claim credit for that crowd, and the crowd ended up being 41,000 people. And all the execs from Turner were there because wrestling was on fire, and for once they were proud of having a wrestling company because they were selling 41,000 tickets. So all those execs see Hulk Hogan and Bill Goldberg in that main event and just go, my God, Hulk Hogan and Bill Goldberg, we got the greatest thing in the world. So it was great for Hogan, even though he lost.
But then the thing is, he always wanted to get it back, though.
Right. And he would never put Bill over on a pay-per-view. If they would have done two more pay-per-views, those would have been the 2 biggest pay-per-views in history, but Hogan wouldn't do the second job because he wanted it back. And, that was the beginning of, then the one finger touch with Kevin Nash and the Kevin Nash with that taser thing. And that's when they just went off a cliff. And that's when, it was,
But we've established that they dropped the ball with Bret and they dropped the ball with Goldberg and etc. But back to Survivor Series, And you know that, and feel free to tell me if I'm telling a lie, right? Just right here in front of God and everybody say, JC, you're fucking lying. But you pretty much know, because you're one of the few people that I shared this with. I couldn't remember whether I called you to see if people were still looking for me or not, but you'd already talked to a few people at that point. And before I called you, I think I was down on about number 4 or 5 on the list, maybe past Bruce and a few other people. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I've known him for a long time, but when Bruce says that he didn't regularly talk to Dave, anyway.
Yeah. I wouldn't say all the time, but we definitely talked.
Well, it was more than just at Christmas.
More than just at Christmas, yeah.
But anyway, basically the whole thing, and I have not come out and said a few times over the last few years when I would hear, well, so-and-so wrote a book and they said that it was their idea, and so-and-so wrote a book and said it was their idea. And then idiot Shitstain, he said, oh, well, I just told him to put the hold on. For 2 reasons. Number one, I didn't like Shawn Michaels because he was an unprofessional prick, personally and professionally. And he had no sympathy from me. And I liked Brett, and I liked his brother, I liked his family, and I liked the way he wrestled, and et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't like I was trying to fucking put a hit out on this guy. But as we talked about here on this show last week, I figured, fuck, I'm never going to do a national TV documentary on this thing again. And it's been 20 years. Just to clear it up, the whole incident came about, at least in the way it came about, because I was in the middle of a job that was driving me crazy, listening to millionaires argue with each other about what they were going to do for $2 and $3 million a year. Well, Michael's, the reason why he was arguing a lot, he was only making $750,000, and he was pissed about that because Brett's dick was bigger and his contract too. But I was listening to millionaires argue with each other. I'm sitting across the table looking at fucking Vince Russo. I had already come to the conclusion of what he was and what he was about, and how he was, if left to his own devices, was going to hotshot and expose the wrestling business into a goddamn Jerry Springer show. And I was fat and miserable and looking for a way to get out of this whole situation before they drove me crazy. And finally, as people know that I am sometimes want to do, I got cranky when we couldn't do anything done and get anything done. And I said, God damn it, Vince, it's your fucking belt. Take it back, double cross him. And at that point, obviously, and this is the one thing I wanted to clarify with you, and other people have said this, Vince never came up with the finish for seriously, well, should he cinch up on a small package? It was a sarcastic, well, what's he supposed to do, cinch up on a small package? And because that's the one he knew from, Wendy and Moo. And I said, no, because then if that's the case, Brett will still kick out and beat the fuck out of him on national TV. And that's when Vince said, well, then how would you do it? Well, now it's a fucking challenge. And I'm pissed, and we're not getting anything else accomplished here anyway. So I'm going to fantasy book in my head a double cross that would hold water. And so, and I gave credit to Scott Teal, who had just reprinted the Fall Guys. Did you get that, by the way, the wrestling reprints he did of the Fall Guys?
I got Fall Guys. I definitely got the Fall. I had an original copy of the Fall Guys too.
Okay, well, you bastard! I only got my original copy last year from one of the fans who sold it to me for a seduced rate. But Scott had reprinted that, and I'd been reading it, and I went through mentally as quickly as I could on a spurm of the moment all of the double crosses I ever knew. And I'd already mentioned, well, sarcastically again, well, fuck it, change the match and book him with Shamrock and he'll lose it. But obviously, no. He'd do the same thing that Bearcat Wright did when he saw Judo Gene LaBelle coming and just get out of the ring and we'd be fucked there.
Well, Ken would never have done that.
Well, Ken wouldn't have done it. They were friends. You couldn't ask two guys to just go into a shoot. And Vince didn't want Ken to win the belt anyway. So I'd already said just in passing.
The funny part of the whole thing is that if Vince came to him with Ken,
he would have done it.
Gladly done the job. But that's the funny part of the whole thing. It's like and Austin and I would go so far as to say anyone on the roster,
anybody,
Shawn.
Probably me, except Shawn. But that's the thing. Vince, I think mentally had to. at least get the belt on who he wanted, because Vince was not wanting to roll over here, right? So he's got that.
Right.
But anyway, so as a result, I said, okay, there's just a few things that needed to be taken into consideration. You can't do an easy way or hard way like Strangler Lewis, because Shawn could not legitimately beat Brett in any way, shape, or form. It wouldn't even have been a contest. So that means you have to have the referee in on.
You described that clump of hair story, which I mean, I knew the story, but I never knew that, like, Shawn came with a clump of hair.
It was goddamn enormous. Well, it was, and I've said this before publicly. I picked it up and put it in my fucking bag and took it home, and my ex-wife still may have it somewhere in a, fucking box somewhere. Because I had to tell the story, right? I had the goddamn visual aid. I said, look at what happened tonight in Hartford.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said, so that means the referee has to be in on it. And what the famous deal with Lewis and Henry DeGlane, where the referee was in on it because he was in fucking, was it, oh my God, it was Paul Bowser at that point, right? Or was he the one they were trying to get it away from?
Paul Bowser would have been the promoter in Montreal when that happened, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, the referee was in on it. And that's how they double-crossed Lewis. Shawn Michaels has no submission holds. Wait a minute. This is an old as the hill spot. The fucking heel gets the goddamn babyface's hold on him, but the babyface powers out and reverses it so quickly because I didn't have much time because they weren't going to listen to me. And like I said, we were getting nothing else done. That's why I said, all right, fucking figure out a spot where Shawn gets the fucking sharpshooter so Brett can reverse it. But the reversal never comes. Been the days before tap out, you relied on the referee. If the guy submitting didn't want to really do it, he wouldn't make that big up and down yes head shake, and the referee would just call it. But this is the main reason. To be honest, I liked Brett. I didn't want people to think I screwed Brett, and I didn't. Vince did. But the reason why I've held this back so long is because, much like, as I said, when we found out that my fucking fan club president was responsible for Vince Russo getting in the wrestling business with John Arezzi.
Was that Andrew Goldberger?
Andrew Goldberger, yes. He said, I know a guy with a video store that'd be glad to sponsor your fucking radio show.
You know what's so funny is I didn't know this story until 3 weeks ago about the Andrew. I mean, I knew the John Arezzi and
I didn't know it until we talked to John about 6 months ago.
Right.
But anyway.
Andrew Gold. I was at a show in New York at the Hilton. WrestleMania week. Yeah. And Andrew Goldberger comes up to me and tells me the story. And I knew Andrew Goldberger; he was a subscriber. But I mean, and he just goes through the story. I mean, I knew the basics, but I go, oh my God, he went through. You know the story. But it was wow, that's the first I'd actually heard of that story.
But much as that, I have been ashamed. I was ashamed for a long time. Now things have gone to such shit, it doesn't really matter anyway. But me, of all people, I figured the fucking finish that did more to expose the wrestling business as a work than anything else in modern history, when you think about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck? But anyway, when I pitched that, and I said, then just have the fucking referee ring the bell and everybody get out of there. And what's Brett going to do? Call the newspapers? Nobody will know. Cut the fucking broadcast, blah, blah, blah. Vince went completely the other way. He went out there and made sure everybody saw him calling for the bell. He fucking, not only that, but and a lot of people have said, well, why did they stay on the air? Because, and you know this, tell me if
the air pretty quick.
Well, but they didn't rush off as quick as they could. And I don't know to whether Vince might have told Kevin Dunn, whatever happens, just shoot it. Because he figured there's going to be some kind of chaos. I mean, he wouldn't shoot it if the guy's dick came out of his tights or whatever, but that may have explained that. The clip that Hall referred to where they zoomed in on Vince with the glob of Brett's spit on his face was not from the WWF broadcast.
It was from the Shadows.
Exactly. It was from the documentary crew, and they were going to do that.
When the Hall thing, when he goes through that, I go like, wait a minute. That's from Wrestling with Shadows, and the WCW thing, that's also from Wrestling with Shadows. None of that was shot by WWE. So it's like the whole, I think that the one thing, and like I said before, like with this week, and it's not fans, because fans are going to, say whatever they think, but like people in the business that thought that still like come to the idea that this was a work. It's just weird to me because number one, it's one of the most famous stories ever. And number two, it's like, you know, I don't know. It's just weird to me that you would could be that wrong on something where there's so much evidence and
I think some of them are like the flat earth people. They fucking know that's bullshit, but they get attention saying it. Right. And then again, some people voted for Donald Trump. So we know that there are people without functioning brain cells that could think this. Yeah. But anyway, that's the issue. Then that's all I knew. And I still to this day don't know who else. We obviously we know that Vince relayed that spot somehow, and then that's the thing. And he just went harumph, and we went back to our business, and that was Wednesday, and I never heard anything about it again.
Patterson was the one who suggested the spot to Brett.
Well, but that's why I'm thinking Vince, I'm sure relayed that, but I've always thought Pat dealt with the boys. The boys loved Pat. He had a lot of credibility. I don't think Vince wanted to put Pat in that position, but since he was always the agent for the title matches, I would be willing to believe that Vince went to Pat and said, "Well, we're going to do this DQ or this schmoz or whatever, but at least let's get this spot in and that spot in or whatever." And I believe he may have protected Pat. I don't think that Pat knew what was going on.
I tend to believe that Pat didn't know, but I don't. Pat's one I don't know, but I think, you know, like really, as far as like who knew, you know, I think, you know, I'm sure he kept it small. I think it was Sean, you know, Earl and Dave Hebner at the last minute, and literally last minute, and Jerry Briscoe, obviously. I mean, that's historically he absolutely knew, but that may have been it. I don't even know if Slaughter knew. I think maybe Slaughter knew by the end, but I don't.
Did China know? Did Joni Lauer know? Oh, really? She was with them. She was riding with them.
Triple H knew. Okay, Triple H knew because it was Sean. I don't know if she knew. I know she said she didn't know, but you know, I don't know.
Well, and here's the thing.
I can tell you that Brett believed she didn't know, and Brett, you know, in his own way, wanted to know who knew and who didn't know. And Brett's list was probably the same as the ones I said. You know, where he knew Sean knew, and he knew Sean knew right away. You know,
sometime between
and he knew Triple H knew, which is that famous scene in Wrestling with Shadows with Julie Hart with Triple H, which is an absolutely amazing scene.
Yeah, don't give me that bullshit. You know you knew.
I mean, and he's looking down, and it's just like when I saw that, that's when it's like, wow, he really, because I didn't know that he knew, and later I found out he did because of the conversation, you know, that actually in many ways led to what happened. Because I do actually want to say this story because it's always, and I wished it was in the thing, and it's the one part of the story that always seems to get forgotten. And I know happened was during this week where Vince is coming up with, and he comes up with finish after finish trying to get Brett to lose to Sean, and Brett's just like, I'll lose to anyone. Let me get out of Canada, you know, and you know, I don't want to lose to Sean. Okay. So Vince goes to Brett once and just goes, if Sean loses to you in Montreal, if Sean puts you over in Montreal, will you put Sean over after Montreal? And Brett was absolutely not a problem. Because I remember actually, what was it? There was somebody who knew that kind of tipped me off before Montreal and goes, you're not going to believe, but Sean's actually going to lose. And then like a day later was like, oh, I don't know what's happening now. Because Vince came to him with Brett to that, and it wasn't from Brett, but it was someone who knew Brett.
Yeah.
But it was like Vince came to Brett with that idea of, you know, Sean will lose in Montreal, you know, and if Sean puts Brett over first, is Brett going to put him over? Oh, Brett's a pro, you know, really. Of course he is. And then he went to Sean and Sean, and it was Sean and Paul, Triple H, and Sean, this is Sean's, and has on an RF video was kind of blindsided, like, did this happen? And he got all nervous, and then but he admitted that it did. And he said that Triple H said, he's leaving the company, don't you ever put him over. Sean refused to put him over.
And by the way, this fucking guy is 1 year removed from not winning the King of the Ring because he fucking fell in with his other clique buddies and exposed the business in Madison Square Garden. And now he feels like he's goddamn able and capable of giving the fucking world champion, such as he was, and Sean's mindset at the time, advice on something this major. He's always been a fucking social climber in the locker room, hadn't he?
But it's amazing where he's turned out.
It's amazing where he climbed to, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, he's like, one of the most powerful guys in the business and set up this whole NXT thing. And I mean, his influence on the business is so absolutely gigantic. But the whole thing is like, so he was like, he's leaving. Don't put him over. And Sean's like, I'm not going to put him over. So then Vince has to go back to Brett and go, Sean won't put you over again. So at this point, like, there's not a chance in hell Brett's going to put Sean over. I mean, like, because this is the one thing where, like, people will talk to me about, like, oh, I can't believe Brett did this. And I kept thinking, and I actually brought it up to Lou Thez once. And, imagine, okay, I said, Lou, imagine that some guy, and he's good. That's some guy, whatever, goes, I'll never put you over, Lou. Like, and it's your time to drop the world's championship. And he goes, not a chance. Or Bruno. I never brought up with Bruno, but it's like, do you think for a heartbeat that some guy goes up to Bruno Sammartino, let's say Ivan Koloff, since that's the guy I lost to, and Ivan goes, thank you, Bruno, for losing, but, if they ask me to lose to you, I will never lose to you. Like, Bruno's going, fuck you, you're never getting the title over my dead body, right? So it's like, that's the thing. Like,
well, Thez proved that with Buddy Rogers. That one remark in 1946, Rogers won the title from Pat O'Connor in 1961. That one remark. Lou Thez was asked to drop the title to Buddy Rogers, and it was just like, there's not a chance. And then part of it was also because Buddy Rogers wasn't a real wrestler. And Lou wanted to lose to Gordienko, who was real, but they couldn't get him in the country. So then he went with Hutton, who, was a fantastic actual wrestler, but the whole thing is like, Lou, there was one remark that Buddy Rogers made. He called Lewis, Strangler Lewis, who was Lou's idol, man, whatever. I mean, Lou's childhood idol was Strangler Lewis, and he calls him a fat bastard. Why do we have to cut him in on, a percentage of our main event gate at some city and Evansville? They were on the way from Louisville. Me and John Cosper tracked the exact date down. Wow. It's in Tuesday night at the Gardens. But anyway, back to let's go to the culprits list, because I'm clearing Pat Patterson. I'm saying, okay, Pat didn't know. Because once again, this conversation, it was me, Vince McMahon, Vince Russo at Vince's house on Wednesday. I never spoke to any of them again until Saturday. On Saturday at the production meeting, which you had written in the Observer, but it was not a meeting just with me, Jim Ross, Shawn Michaels, and a few other people that were listed. It was the normal pay-per-view production meeting that took place the night before, and Michaels came in and sat in on it, which was at the time unusual, but not the first ever, right? So, okay. And what I had asked Vince on the way out, when we got to the main event, said, okay, music, match, music on out. Good night. That's the way they just, normally we'd go over the finish, whose music was playing, whatever. But in that case, that's the way they did it. Good night, everybody. Broke up the meeting. I went by Vince and just leaned over. I said, have you got a finish? And he said, yes. I said, that's all I need to know. And I left. And we found out that Shawn Michaels and Jerry Briscoe went to the fucking hotel room, and Jerry tried to make Shawn Carl Gotch in a fucking night in a hotel room. So they knew. Triple H knew because Shawn, not an idiot, also knew that Triple H was actually bigger and in a lot better shape and probably could take care of himself. So if somebody was going to kick Shawn Michaels' ass, then he'd have his buddy there. So Triple H knew. Who knows whether China knew, and who cares at this point anyway? Vince McMahon knew. I don't think Bruce knew because, once again, plausible deniability.
Bruce is always denied. And
well, you can't believe anything. You can't believe anything Bruce says. But I don't think he knew because he didn't need to know. And at the gorilla position, he would have been there with all the boys. And he's not that good of an actor, so he really was shocked.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether Slaughter knew or whether Vince just said, Sarge, come on out. We're going to do some business. Need you. I want you there just in case. Because I mean, Sarge at that point wouldn't have cared if somebody come at Vince. Sarge would have took care of it. He didn't care what was going on. So Slaughter's a question mark, and none of the production crew had to be alerted, except for I can believe that Vince would have said to Kevin Dunn, "Whatever happens, pal, just shoot it until we did get it done," or something like that.
I don't. You got to keep the. You see, the thing is, they had to keep the number down because the key is that Bret had a lot of friends.
Yeah.
And if it got back to Bret, the whole idea would be foiled.
And we know also that of the people that knew, Triple H has said he came up with the spot. Well, that's ridiculous because I'd come up with the spot the previous Wednesday, but I guess he wanted to get in on the thing. And I'm sure the double cross came across everybody's mind because we were all in the wrestling business. So that's something you would think about. But that particular spot, no. We can count Russo out because he didn't know what a fucking double cross was to begin with. He sat there and looked at us with a blank look, and there would have been no reason for Vince to tell him that it was going to happen. So, and we also know that he's a shameless bandwagon hopper on her. So I'm pretty sure he didn't know. So looking back, I can't figure out anybody else in the company that would have needed to know and would have been told besides Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Jerry Briscoe, and possibly Sergeant Slaughter.
Yeah, I think the same. What?
I'm just saying, can you? Yeah, and that's how it worked.
No,
I'm saying, can you? Can you think of anyone else?
Yeah, no, that would have been the list that I would have come up with. Slaughter's the one that I don't know, and the other ones for sure knew, and they would probably have been the only ones.
So, and that's how you pull off a fucking surprise or a double cross or anything else in the wrestling business is you don't tell every fucking body in the world and put it on all your formats.
Right.
But it should have been actually, in hindsight, my thing was do it like a real double cross like they used to where the fans won't know and it won't break kayfabe and get the fuck out of there. Vince went the complete other way with it and instead made it plain to pretty much to everybody what they were doing. But everybody still should have come out better. And of course, then Vince, here's the thing. Remember for what was it, a week, 2 weeks? He thought he was going to be the babyface. He tried the promo, the time-honored tradition to shame Bret. He couldn't figure out that he was not going to be the babyface for the first week or two.
Yeah. The other one that I remember, because I knew about this ahead of time, I don't remember who told me, but they mentioned, I guess the promo had been taped, but it hadn't aired. Okay, so because it wasn't done live on Raw, and it's like Vince is doing this promo, and I was kind of told, it's like he's going to make Bret the heel, because Bret wouldn't do the job and all that, and I was like, Bret's coming off pretty sympathetic anyway, number one, but the one line was Vince was going to say that if this was the punch, if it was a fair fight, the ending would have been different, and I was just like, he can't say that. It's like, I don't care who would win a fight between Bret and Vince, and it doesn't matter, okay? But the people do not want to hear that, even though Vince is big and in shape and all that, they do not want to hear that the 52-year-old promoter could beat the world champion. If it was a prelim guy, fine, but not the world champion, and not Bret, who'd been like a top guy in that company for years and years, who the fans really wanted to believe in, you know what I mean? As and he'd been portrayed as a top guy. You don't want to say that because unlike today where it really wouldn't matter one iota, even as late as the 90s, the people did want to believe that the wrestlers were tough guys. Like,
and besides that, let's be honest, Bret could still whip fucking Vince McMahon in 1997, for God's sake.
But why do you even have to? Why do you even have to say that? And I thought, as soon as he says that, number one, for me, of all people say this, but it exposes your business and your world champion. You're telling the people you're saying that your world champion is not really a tough guy, and the people
it exposed his ego. It exposed his ego is what it did.
And I go like, he can't say that. And it's like, well, who's going to tell him he can't, right? But I remember, and then I watched it and I go like, I can't believe that he said that. You know,
I saw it. I can't remember whether I was either at the studio when they shot it or I was at the studio when they were watching it back right after they shot it. And that's the thing, that the time-honored tradition business gave me horrible stomach aches. The whole idea of trying to not say do a job, but this is basically, I'm saying, my God, they're going the wrong way with this. They're telling everybody. And yeah, Vince McMahon was the greatest heel performer of all time on television as a personality, as a character, as the kids say these days. But unfortunately, and he could have done that in any era and didn't have to expose the business. But unfortunately, this was the start of exposing the business, letting people behind the scenes, like I said, the work shoot and the shoot work that's just so garbage, because now by inference, by extrapolation, by whatever, well, this is a real shoot going on now, and it's not like everything else we do, which is a work. Then you've just exposed the business. And then every time now you tell people, well, this is real as opposed to being a work, but the fucking shoot is a work that we find out later on, then it killed everybody's credibility. This was the start of I know the Attitude Era was already going on, but this was the start of the downfall of the business, in large part because now that Russo's going to hot shot everything and make everything Jerry Springer and just do everything that can possibly be done. But at the same time over here, we're telling everybody that it's all a fucking work and the behind the scenes shit's the only real stuff. That's why since 2001, once they finally punctured a hole in Stone Cold Steve Austin and people couldn't believe him anymore, and WCW folded up and all the traditional fans just said, well, fuck it. We've never recovered.
Well, never to that level. No. Now it's a completely different. And now it's a completely different industry. You know. Yeah.
Now it's nice if you show up, folks, but we're getting all our money from television, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just an amazing period of losing popularity while economically being like by far the biggest it's ever been in a manner. You know, largely, I mean, the funny thing is, and you know, it's a discussion we could have on another subject, but people like that go like, well, you have to do it this way to get these TV rights. And it's like, do you realize that if we were in the, what's the word I'm looking for? In the era that we're in now, and you remember the numbers that Mid-South Wrestling and Mid-Atlantic Wrestling and Georgia Wrestling and all of these companies did, and even well into the 80s. And you were pulling those kind of numbers, and they could have pulled, you know, I like people go, well, they could have never pulled those numbers nationally. And that's bullshit. Mid-South Wrestling went national with no publicity in a bad time slot and did a 5.3 rating, you know, immediately, you know, like as soon as
on TBS.
On TBS. So would that have worked on a national, would Mid-South Wrestling work on national? It worked immediately. It didn't even take time. It worked immediately. So it's like, yes, that's what the numbers would have been.
But besides that, even on a local level, Smoky Mountain Wrestling in the 90s was doing a 4 in East Tennessee, a 4 rating, and I was having to pay the station. Now, I bet they don't have a fucking show that's doing a 4 now. They would have loved to paid for that now, 25 years later. But is the whole thing changed? Yes.
Yeah. We didn't even talk Memphis numbers, which were just through the roof for, you know.
They would have just given they'd have given Jerry Jarrett the deed to the station. Here's Channel 5. Keep your show on.
The whole thing is like if that was the case then, you know what I mean? It's like wrestling would have been like Major League Baseball. You know what I mean? It would have been just gigantic, you know, and it doesn't have to be Vince's version. You know what I mean? It's like, I think this is the people goes, well, any other version wouldn't have worked nationally. And it's like, that's bullshit. You know, Vince was in the right place at the right time and everybody else was gone. And he was wrestling and he's managed to, you know, and he, and we had this era where all of a sudden, you know, live television's important, but it wasn't until, you know, the ratings thing and the money for television never really got in until, you know, Spike outbid USA for Raw. You know, that was the first time that he got real money for the thing, because what people don't realize is that, like, you know, when Raw was doing those giant numbers, you know, he got $5.5 million a year, which at the time sounded like great money for television because everybody else got nothing, right?
Yeah,
he's getting $5.5 million a year from a TV company, but you know, all the money was from the pay-per-views and the house shows. That's how you had to make your money. And now it's like everything's an after. It's like you're clear sailing. You could put on, you know, you don't have to engage the audience. You don't have to put on matches that will draw money. All you got to do is fill TV time. And
hey, here's a question off topic, but shoot some stuff down for us. Where is this story coming from that AEW is doing a time buy? Because that's not the case.
It's not a true story.
Well, I'm saying, where's it coming from that people are buying this?
It was a reporter.
Or repeating it.
And the funny thing is, the reporter himself said he heard that, and he said, but he actually used. I didn't hear what he said, but he said something to the effect of, you know what? It's like, I would trust Dave Meltzer's version more than mine because, you know, this is his beat, so to speak. So it was like, he basically said, I've heard it, but if Dave says it's wrong, and it is wrong. You know, it's not a time buy because they're, you know, if it was a time buy, this deal would have been done, you know, in one day. You go, hey, I'm going to spend all this money on whatever, and it'd be on in 2 a.m. You're not putting time buys in prime time, you know, and there's more than one station involved in it and all that. So the AEW time buy story, it's just not true.
Well, we can shoot that down. I heard that the other day and I was like, what the fuck? And I knew that wasn't the case. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, because it remains to be seen to me whether they're going to be serious and whether they're going to realize that the cutesy stuff that they do for their beloved indie crowds that love them is not going to fly in prime time on a major, you know, national cable outlet of whatever description. But you know, at the same time, a lot of people they're either they're in two camps. Either everybody's going, oh, this is going to be the greatest wrestling we've ever seen, which it probably won't be because the greatest wrestling I ever saw hadn't happened in 30 years. Or they're trying to completely take the fucking piss out of it and shoot it down right off the bat, which isn't really fair either. And all I've ever said was, I think there's a lot of overconfidence going into this thing. And they've got experience in terms of Chris Jericho and Jim Ross and some people with experience in places, but they've also got a lot of inexperience and a lot of learning on the job. And I just hope that they decide to take a serious route instead of doing the hoo-ha, because a lot of their guys are noted for hoo-ha, and that ain't going to fly in prime time.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Look, the guys I know, you know, actually I know every one of those guys. They're smart guys, and they're very creative guys, and they are learning on the job, and they'll tell you they're learning on the job. You know, I mean, it's like it's a real weird. You know, they you know, the Young Bucks were very, you know, like the stuff that they did as far as like merchandise and things like that. They were genius. You know, as far as that, and the Being the Elite show was a real, you know, I mean, it caught people's eye and all that. But you know, there's how big they got was amazing given the television exposure they had. They've done a great job of internet exposure in doing that. But to get, you know, for this thing to work, you know, it's got to be essentially like, I guess the perfect example is UFC. UFC was big on the internet, and they were doing 50,000, 30,000 buys on pay-per-view, and they were losing their ass. And then they got on Spike TV, and, you know, immediately, because they were on television, and they became an in thing on television right away with the first season of Ultimate Fighter. And some of that was also coming right after Raw, which was very beneficial to them. But you know, they survived long after they followed Raw. They've survived. But the point is, when they got on television, those 50,000, you know, Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture did 48,000 buys, legitimate number on pay-per-view for their first match. Their second match did, I believe, like just under 300. You know, after 3 months of television, that's the value of television. So if they go on television, and granted, television is not as valuable now as it was in 2005, but it's still very valuable. It's still the most valuable thing. If they go on television and they can put on a good show and get the right publicity, you know, and hype and everything like that, and build their audience and put on great shows, hopefully television expands that audience. If they're at the audience they're at now, their audience that they have now is a small and incredibly loyal audience because, the sellout in Vegas, spoke, that was an amazing accomplishment to do with no television and no but,
here's the thing. Let me say this, because everybody said, "Oh, Cornette hates these guys." Well, I have nothing whatsoever good to say about Omega because of the doll and the 9-year-old girl and all that stuff. And I know the Bucks, but they just get silly. But the point is, I can recognize that, yes, as I said before, for the kind of people who like that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing those people like. They built and cultivated a very devoted, very dedicated, very diehard audience, a larger audience than anybody else at that level has ever been able to put together. And yes, they should be congratulated for that. But the question is, when they take the next step up to, you got to have 2 million people a week watching your television show on a platform of that level, maybe even a little more because of wrestling.
I don't think they're going to need two at this stage of the game, but they're going to need more than 200,000.
Close to, it's not going to be, goddamn my mother, the car fucking numbers or whatever. They ain't going to last. And they've also got to find a place to do that 52 weeks a year, unless they tape in clumps. And if they tape in clumps,
well, they're not taping in clumps unless they change the battle plan. The battle plan is absolutely live 2 hours every, whatever day of the week it is, because it's not. The question is, set day right now.
Do you think, is there, in your experience and your perception of this, is there an acknowledgement that this is going to be somewhat of a struggle for them, like it would be for anybody else, or is there too much overconfidence? And secondly, do you think that most of them realize that they've got to be? They can't do the fucking, super kicking the 9-year-olds or whatever. They have to be somewhat serious about their efforts to get the people that don't already watch and buy into what they're doing.
Okay. I know people won't believe this, but I don't talk to them about those guys about creative or where they're going or direction or anything at all. Like literally at all. The only stuff I've ever done is a couple of times I've suggested, people that I've seen, hey.
Well, and I'm not even saying that as far as talking to about creative. I'm saying I don't want the meatloaf recipe. I just want to know, do they know what they're cooking? Is what they're cooking going to be for a small niche audience, a mainstream palate?
I know Tony Khan. Okay. I know that Tony Khan, he loves Mid-South wrestling. I mean, he loves that kind of wrestling. I know that he wants it to be, again, look, they want to make, they want to do win-loss record stuff, which is even stronger than before. He's a sports guy, his soccer, football, baseball. He's a sports analytics guy. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a numbers guy. And they got Chris Harrington, who's an incredible numbers guy working for them. They're, so, I mean, that's the one thing where people go, oh, they're going to just like blow money left and right. It's like the guys that, Chris Harrington is like the guy that you go to when you want to balance the budget, and you don't want to overspend. It's like, yeah, they'll probably lose money the first year. I'm sure they will.
Oh God. Yeah.
But this is geared to a profitable company. This is not Dixie Carter, who has no idea what she's doing. Being swayed by this con man and that con man and believing that, this guy, did this, so therefore he's whatever. I mean, you were there, TNA better than I do. But
in other words, they're not going to be at the Doubletree Hotel in Orlando across from the Universal entrance, sitting next to Dixie, pouring her wine and talking about how great she is.
Yeah.
But like some others we're doing on that roster that would be paid 6 figures to wrestle one time a year.
Yeah. So I mean, they're approaching this as a business. I think that as far as they want it to be like sport. They want it to be like sport. Now, are they going to have like entertainment? They're going to have entertainment thrown in for sure. They're going to have, I mean, it's a mix. But what the mix is, I won't know until the TV, and none of us will know until the TV and how they shape it out. And it's again, like all in, which is the prototype of what they want to do, was a big success. But there were when I was at All In, this was my opinion, most of the matches were really, really good. Some of the matches were fantastic. As a show was really good. And there were a couple of things that absolutely got over great that I watched and I go, okay, this is getting over great with a live crowd, but I would not do this on national television. But that was like 5% of the show. So, but it did get over great with a live crowd. But it's like I wouldn't do this on national television, or I would be one of the spots in the Battle Royal I would be squeamish of, and I still would be today just because. And people will get real mad at this one, but it was the one where Jordan Grace got her head kicked in, which got over big. And I'm a big.
I honestly didn't know this happened, but
yeah. So it's a guy, I forgot who it was. It was in Battle Royal, and a guy kicked Jordan Grace in the head real hard. She sold it great. It was a great wrestling spot, but I just don't think on a national television broadcast that you want that, even though they can pull it off. And a lot of people get real mad at that, including a lot of women wrestlers that think that we should be able to do that.
Well, no, here's the, it's not about being sexist. It's about being fucking ridiculous. And I've always said, when you get a girl real hot as a valet or a manager, and she can take a slam or she can, some type of bump like that, that's great. That's a pop because
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
And plus you don't fucking use a lot of full scoop slams in domestic disturbances.
You don't want to punch and you don't want to kick.
No, and also you don't want to be competitive with. You don't want a man, a trained professional athlete in any combat sport, to be competitive with even a trained professional woman, because it's just fucking anatomically and genetically ridiculous. Yes, Ronda Rousey can kick the shit out of the guy that washes cars down at Jiffy Car Wash, but that's a whole different thing. That's an elite level Olympic athlete against a guy who washes cars. But if they're all supposed to be trained athletes, then no, the woman should not be competitive against the man because it's physically and anatomically stupid. And then you get into the whole issue of domestic violence and violence of men against women, and why open that can of peas just to make your guys. That's what did Eli Drake really quit because he didn't want to work with Tessa Blanchard because I praised him.
He didn't want to work with Tessa Blanchard. Yeah.
Okay. And I just saw Tessa and I love Tessa and she's great. But it's great that somebody has principles. It's great somebody has principles. Go ahead.
I've got to say this because I saw a match with Trent Beretta against Candice LeRae. Okay. Live. And the match, they worked the match so well. There was no, it wasn't an insult to your intelligence. And it was, what it was similar to, and you will actually remember this match. Do you remember in Georgia Championship Wrestling, they had tag team tournament, and they had the,
Judy Martin and Leilani Kai, wasn't it? Or was it,
I don't think it was Leilani.
No, it wasn't Leilani.
But Joyce Grable.
Joyce Grable and Judy Martin in 1981 in the Thanksgiving Tag Team Tournament, I believe.
Right, against Steve-O, and I forgot who Steve-O's partner was. Okay.
Oh God.
And they'd done like the women's lib thing, and they worked the match, and because they put the match on TV the next week, and it was like, and I was like, God, how are they going to do this? And they pulled it off, and they pulled it off real well, and Steve-O even did the commentary over it, and was just kind of like, we didn't want to hit her, that's why we didn't, just like whatever. But we had to advance in the tournament, so they worked a match that made sense. It didn't hurt the business at all. It was and the guys went over and all that. But with Candice and Trent, it was very different because it was later. But it was like I was watching this and going like, this is really freaking good because number one, the match got over, but also the way they worked, they were not working it to where you had any doubt Trent would win, and there never was a doubt, but. It was Trent didn't want to hurt her because you don't want to hurt her.
Right.
But he also didn't want to lose the match. And by doing so, he was careless in spots that gave her a little bit of offense, but it wasn't serious offense. But it made for those, and she would do a cool move on him, but he never decked her. You know what I mean? And he never did anything where you go like, oh, this is ugly. I don't want this.
Well, then
I thought it was
in that case,
it can be done. That's what I'm saying. But
if in that case, if it can be done sensibly, then then that's where you want, instead of just featuring. Yeah, don't do it all the time, and don't do it because you can't do that every time or it gets old. And instead of just featuring, intergender wrestling for the sake of it. Wait until you've got either a girl hot or a guy hot and fits that spot, and sell some tickets to it because it's unusual and unheard of, and then do that like that.
But I remember I would watch that stuff on Lucha Underground, and more power to those women in Lucha Underground. You know, some of those women in Lucha Underground, you know, Melissa and Ivelisse and Taya. I mean, they had some awesome matches there, and including matches with guys. But I thought that it was done. I mean, I can only say this is me. I've been a fan for a long time. That it was a turnoff for me. That's one of the reasons I just lost interest in Lucha Underground, was because, number one, you know, it's the punch and the kick in the face, which I just thought this will never play on on El Rey Network, it's one thing. This will never play on USA Network. It'll never play on, you know, whatever. HBO,
yeah, well, most people would be upset because a woman's getting punched in the face. I'm upset because the business is getting exposed. But it's I bow to the more people that would be upset about the violence on women.
Yeah. So like in watching like that, to me, that was a negative. And then they made Sexy Star World Champion, trying to make it, you know, like this is this great breakthrough. And I just was like, this is horseshit. You know, to me, it was like that, you know, some people, yeah, maybe to some people it was. To me, it was like, you're doing it for the sake of doing it, not understanding that, you know, who's going to take your championship seriously. And it's like, and it's not being said. I'm a big fan of women's wrestling, especially now, like Tessa and Taya and you know, Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair.
Tessa is incredible,
and everyone up and down the, you know, I mean, they really have good stuff, and you can work spots with guys. You can work spots with guys. You can even work a mixed tag match, and there's even a way to work a singles match if it's really clever. But it's got to be unusual, not a weekly thing.
And the best match at last year's WrestleMania was Rousey in the mixed tag.
Absolutely.
I thought.
Absolutely.
You know, so it can't be done, but it's just, but you know, and this is what I was telling a couple of the guys in the locker room at MLW here not long ago, is now it seems like, and we're getting off topic, but it seems like that for a lot of matches today, guys will sit down with Brian versus Dave. Well, Brian and Dave will sit down, and Brian will say, Dave, what do you do? What are all your moves? And Dave will sit down and say, okay, Brian, what are all your moves? And they'll do each other's moves and try to have the main event at Starrcade 86, even if Brian is a preliminary guy and Dave is a main event guy.
I know where you're going with this.
Top guys and main event guys used to have different levels of the way they would work with guys, depending not on their talent, but how they were being presented by the promotion and perceived by the audience. You could be the best wrestler in the fucking world, right? You could be Tony Charles. You could be Billy Robinson, whatever the fuck. But if you were being presented as a preliminary guy and the people saw you lose more than you won, then if a main event guy got in the ring with you, he would control the action. He would probably have most of the match. He'd give you enough where you didn't look like a complete fucking putz, and then he would beat you. If you were a middle card guy that sometimes got a peek at the main events and most often was in the middle, then he would give you more. He would let you shine more, but ultimately he'd still shut you down. And then if he was another main event guy, then that's when everybody would do each other's moves back and forth, and it would be really a fucking horse race and goddamn tear the house down. Nobody works with guys anymore at the level that they're presented at or perceived at. They work with guys at the level of their talent. Therefore, you have main event guys going out there and getting, in half the match, getting the shit kicked out of them by guys that are fucking preliminary guys or that are underneath guys or that the people don't see as stars just because they are good workers and can do these moves. Well, do them somewhere else when you're being promoted as a top guy in some other territory. Don't do them here against my main event guy, because it ain't going to really get you over as much as keep my main event guy from fucking getting over.
Okay, you said something. There's just two things popped into my head from when I was a kid, okay? And these two stories that are completely contradictory, okay? Because you remember, I grew up with Ray Stevens, and Ray Stevens, no matter who he was in the ring with, no matter who, he gave that guy, every guy he was in the ring with, you had a moment where you thought he was beating Ray Stevens. He was that good, but he stayed over, and he was Ray Stevens, okay? He was, I mean, and he would give the job guy everything.
Yeah.
But he would beat him at the end.
But when you're the best in the world, you can get away with shit.
Yeah, he beat him convincingly. And Flair did the same thing. I remember Flair would give near falls to prelim guys. But
George South.
Yeah, right. But on the flip side, okay, so Superstar Graham was through our territory, and he was going to work with Ray Stevens at Cow Palace, so it's like the equivalent of pay-per-view, big show. And, Billy was 2 years in the business, maybe 3, but, not a great worker by any means. Fantastic talker even then. Okay, fantastic talker. And his idol was Ray Stevens, like everyone in that territory, and half the business. But it was like, I want to be like Ray Stevens. And Ray Stevens is 5'9", 5'10", 230. Billy's 6'4", 290 then, because he was big and bulky. He wasn't as cut as he would be later. He was just a big, and one of the strongest men in the world at the time. So Billy goes in there, and he was working with the job guy. This is the week before the Cow Palace show. The TV, it was actually what aired the night of the Cow Palace. So it's the most important TV. It's airing like at 5 to 6. The Cow Palace is at 8, and that's the one you know how the business was in. That's the drive you home. You're going to convince that guy he's leaving the house right now and taking his family, driving to San Francisco because he can't miss this match. So he's going to work with Ray Stevens, and he sold like crazy for a guy much smaller than him. And Roy was just screaming at him, "What the fuck are you doing? You cost us $2,000 on the gate because people aren't going to believe that you can, they're not going to believe in you as a heel because you sold too much for this guy." And all Billy was is like, "But Ray Stevens." But it's like, no, you're not Ray Stevens.
Yeah.
And so it was like that. I guess the thing I'm saying is like every issue is different and every person is different, and you work to the strengths of your person. If you're not a good worker, but you're big and strong, you probably shouldn't sell so much for a small guy. If you're a fantastic worker, you can kind of get away with almost anything because you're a fantastic worker.
But now you know what you've done. You've told all the people that in their mind think they're fantastic workers that they can do these things. But no, here's the thing. Yeah. It's as simple as this. If you go back and look at a Mid-South Wrestling TV match from 1984, the Midnight Express versus anybody, if they were job guys, when the guy got the tag and the other babyface made the comeback, he'd throw 3 punches at Bobby Eaton and fucking shoot him off and go for a backdrop. And if it was just a job guy, Bobby would drop the elbow on the back of his head and cut him off right there. If he was a middle card guy, Bobby'd take the backdrop and then cut him off. If the guy was a main event guy, Bobby'd take the backdrop and come up and continue the comeback with a drop kick and some more bumps. It was just that level of psychology that all the guys used to where they would work with guys at their level they were perceived at and not what they could do, because some of these guys would go on to other territories and be featured in main events, and then you'd do all their shit. But that is something that I see in the business these days, that everybody just sits down because nobody's in the same territory really anymore. So especially on the independents, when they come, well, what do you do? Okay, well, I do this. Well, let's all do each other's shit. No, sometimes somebody's there just get their ass whooped so somebody else can get over. And that's another thing we've lost in these matches. Just to me.
Certainly in some places where the mentality is that you produce nothing but great matches, which is tough because if you produce nothing but great matches, then every great match becomes ordinary. But at the same time, it's weird too, because each audience is different too. Because I've seen shows that do things that I would, number one, never do, and number two, believe would not work, and would not work in most places that do work in certain places. And I've seen people try to duplicate that with a different group of fans, and it doesn't work for all the reasons why I would think it wouldn't work. But sometimes it does work, and every audience, it's like Terry Funk was always like, every audience is different, and you figure out what the audience is, which isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. And you did that in WCW. And with Crockett, it's like you didn't do the same frickin' match every single night, even when you were working with the same guys. You tweaked it and figured it out and called it on the fly and all that. That's
some crowds like to see the babyface shine, and so you shine the babyface. Some crowds like to just be mad, so you give the babyface a couple spots and cut them off and get the heat and let them fight from underneath, because now the people are mad and booing the heat, so they're into it there. As some people just might not just want to see you on some particular night. But, that's the thing is that I love great wrestling matches. And here's another thing I was going to mention. And this brings this up. If there's any doubt as to why that I despise Vince Russo with such a passion that borders on nothing like anything has ever been nobody's ever been despised in the world like this. It's because he had a quote. This is the only time he told the truth on the whole show. He believes this to be true. It's freaking wrestling. It doesn't mean anything. That right there tells why that I will always hate him and he will never understand me and we will always be opposites. But for the kind of people, go ahead.
When you go, when you go, it's all fake. What does it matter? To me, it's like that's like this is again. But you grew. Okay, here's the difference. You grew up in the business where if you screwed up, there were consequences. If the main event guys did a bad interview or did a bad show the month before, you did a bad show. You didn't give the people something they wanted to come back for. You paid the price and you learned the lesson. Nobody pays the price and nobody learns the lesson because there is no lesson. You're not coming back to the city for 9 months. They're all going to forget anyway. There's no program that you're building for a rematch. So you're just out there doing this thing.
You're out there jacking off is what you're doing. But
you still want to make the business more popular.
Well, yeah. And see, that's the thing.
Not insult the intelligence of the people.
When he says that, besides the fact that it just, for everybody that's ever cared about the business or devoted themselves to business or whatever, you just want to gut him with a fucking knife. But also,
I can't go that far, but
well, no, I can. I could easily. I would put his entrails around my neck like fucking Christmas garland. But here's the thing: there were still tens of millions of dollars riding on it, whether it's fake or not, whether it's a work or not.
Oh, yeah.
But all it was to guys like that is just a jack-off session. So that was telling. But the point I was going to make was when people say, well, all you want to see is just these 40-minute boring wrestling matches with just, athletics, right? No. I like great wrestling matches, but I like great wrestling matches even better when big stars are doing them. And to get to be a big star, sometimes the wrestling is not as important, yes. But it also, when you get to be a big star, that means that people, for lack of a better term, it's harder for people to see through your shit. Because Steve Austin stomping a mud hole in a guy, those were rotten looking stomps, but everybody was going crazy because it was Steve Austin doing it. First, you make people invest themselves in your personality. Do they hate you or do they love you? Then you have a great wrestling match, and that's what keeps them coming back, and that's what draws money, and that's what sells tickets or gets ratings or whatever. And I was saying this the other day also to some of the guys. There are three main reactions in wrestling. There's yay, like cheering, yay, we love this, right? There's booing, boo, we hate this. And there's ooh or wow, which is the big spot reaction, right? Oh, ooh. Yeah. Yay and boo is what draws the money. Ooh and wow is what those guys do in the middle of drawing the money. Ooh and wow doesn't draw the money. Yay and boo draws the money. But all the guys you're yaying and all the guys that you're booing have to throw a little wow ooh in the middle. But wow ooh by itself don't sell you any fucking tickets.
It's a weird, I mean, it depends on the place, depends on the people and everything, but it's the personality that's the most important. You've got to build up personalities that people want to, and the key is you got to build up personalities that people want to like, and you got to build up personalities that people want to dislike. And then what you do is, you want to put them, when you get them in there, you want to put them on the roller coaster, you know what I mean? In the main event where you get something really exciting. When you're done, you're exhausted, they're exhausted. You feel like you've seen something tangible and,
now it's harder than ever also because the better a heel is, the more people will want to cheer him because they know it's all gaga.
Yeah,
So they want to reward talent.
It is different. There are guys who know how to be heels and everything like that. And then there's sometimes where, you want to make that contest two best in the world at the time. And that's what the deal is. And that's fine too. That's the epic match, but you can't have 52 epic matches a year. You can have two.
Yeah.
You can have three, I think.
When you have 12 7-footers, you have no giants.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, I think that there's, sometimes I've seen things where guys are doing an epic match to have an epic match where the story isn't really there for an epic match. The story is there for, we want to see one guy kick the shit out of the other guy.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I see guys doing an epic match, it's the right time in the right place, and it's absolutely fantastic, but yeah, it's like in the Florida territory, everyone will talk about Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr., but they did not do that 52 weeks a year. In every city or any city, they might have done 3 of those in every city, during the course of the year. And people today will remember them because they were so freaking great. But, you still had to have your weekly thing that they were the exception of the rule. They were not the rule. You did not have 60-minute. I mean, you and I, we saw 60-minute matches. We did not see 60-minute matches every week.
No.
We didn't even see 30-minute matches every week. We saw them on occasion, and when they were, Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee match, right? That series of matches, which just popped into my head, because I remember the videos and it was awesome and this and that. I mean, that was the stuff that here we are 35, 37 years later, and we're still talking about. But if they did a match like that every single week, it wouldn't even stand out. And that's the reason why we're talking about it, is because, it was so impactful, I guess is the word you want.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
You want impactful, but to be impactful, you got to pick your spots, because if you try to be impactful 52 weeks of a year, you will not be impactful.
Well, and I'll say this. I'll ask you this question, or propose to you this theory. And then we'll close this thing up before it gets to be a mini series. But do you think that, and a lot of the talent in the business these days, it's not their fault, because you hear the old timers once again, these guys these days. Well, in a lot of cases, guys these days that are fucking puking and shitting on each other in the middle of the ring deserve to be called these fucking guys these days. But a lot of talent,
that's a completely different element.
But a lot of talent these days are handicapped in terms of, there has never been a time where the fans in whatever arena for whatever promotion or company knew more that the wrestler coming down the aisle has been given his name by someone else, has been told what to say and what to dress like and what to look like by someone else, has been told whether he's going to win or lose and probably how that's going to happen, and is in all other ways controlled by the promoter. Whereas in 30 years ago, yes, you might have known wrestling is a work to whatever level or extent you knew that, but you also could look at Bruiser Brody or fucking Abdullah the Butcher or any number of these guys and go, well, I don't care whether somebody's telling them what to do or not. They look like if they wanted to go into business for themselves, they would do it, and I'm not going to fucking test them. The only people that have that, or Brock Lesnar, that's why he makes whatever $1 million per match when he decides to show up, because people believe, not only because he has the money to just say fuck it, and also the WWE has convinced everybody that the guys are all in fear for their fucking jobs. I've quit on a number of jobs that were highly paid, but the point is, all the guys are controlled. They're not dangerous in the fans' minds. They're not capable of going off script or going out of control.
They're too interchangeable.
Yes.
And the fans believe they're too interchangeable. And I think you want individuality, you want stars. And I think that WWE has decided they're going to make the stars out of the McMahon family, and that everybody else is just interchangeable wrestlers.
Yeah, and the fans want somebody to look at and go, you know what? This guy might just fucking flip out and fucking take a sledgehammer and goddamn clear this whole fucking building out. Because that's how you create an attraction that draws money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they want like larger than life stars, but then it's weird because Vince has his mentality of what it is, and it's like then the people reject it. And also, I mean, and this is a really unique thing, and it's not like it's good or bad or whatever, because for years and years and years, Vince did what he wanted. He just did what he wanted, and it's like, I know better than these people. And then in this last year, they've done all this market research, and it's like they know that like these ratings are falling, and when no matter what, people people will make excuses for it. Oh, TV's different. Oh, the world's different, and it is. But these ratings are falling.
Yeah.
And I know WWE is looking for answers. I know this, okay? They are. And they're trying hard. They're trying to run a good business and all that. And one of the things that they've done this year, and you've seen it with Becky Lynch and you saw it with Kofi Kingston, especially with Kofi Kingston, is that if the fans somehow get behind someone, they're going to go all the way with them. I mean, like 10 years ago, they're in a prayer. Vince McMahon would hear this stuff with Kofi Kingston and be like what he did with his reaction to Cesaro. It's like, oh, well, there's some people who think it's cool, but he's not a main eventer in my eyes. And Cesaro is more of a main eventer in Vince's eyes probably than Kofi Kingston. But this year he went all the way because the people, it just was a story that was there, and the people just picked up on it for whatever reason. They said the right thing. He's been here 11 years. He's never got a chance. And then all these people are like, it's his turn. He's been here 11 years. And he's worked hard, and it's his turn. And, like you will laugh at it. And me growing up the way it's like, it's his turn, and he's going to be world champion.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
World champion isn't about his turn, but that's what the people want. And they went with it. But, so in doing that, it's such a different business.
But now doesn't that tell the fans with Daniel Bryan Danielson with Kofi, doesn't that tell the people, okay, if you pitch enough stink, we'll push the guys you like as to the guys we want to push, and then they're going to make a stink every time they like somebody, and you're constantly battling the people. Yeah. And that's not a good position to be in either.
Yeah, no, it's a tough audience because the audience will be fickle because, I mean, Ronda Rousey's the perfect example. They loved Ronda Rousey. And then one day, because she was always getting put over like a star, because she's a star, and she was getting the mainstream, all of a sudden there was this thing of like, well, now we like Becky Lynch, and Ronda Rousey's in the way of Becky Lynch, and Ronda Rousey's like, she doesn't deserve this because she hasn't paid her dues in this business. And they just flipped the switch on Ronda Rousey. And WWE, they had no intention of turning Ronda Rousey heel. But, it was like, okay, now we got to do it. But that by doing that, though, by that type of a fan base, if you're a writer, you're fucked. Because how do you do a long-term storyline when the people are going to come up with something like, oh, we love you, Ron. Thank you for coming to Wrestling Ronda Rousey. And my God, you came in and you're having great matches that you never should have been able to have. Doesn't even make sense how good you are. To 6 months later, it's like, fuck you. These women have been here for 10 years and you've only been here for 6 months, and they gave you the belt, even though you're the biggest star we have. And they're putting you in a main event. They won't put Becky in the main event, who, whatever. So now we're going to hate you. And now we got to turn Ronda Rousey. And it's like, so yeah, and then people go, and then people will go, but these storylines make no sense. Well, no shit, because it's like they're trying to cater to you, and you're not allowing them to make sense. And that's, what's the right thing? I don't know. I mean, I think I watch it from the sidelines and go like, I'm glad I'm not writing, because I would have these long-term stories, and then in the middle the fans would just go, oh, well, I don't like where this story's going. I want this preliminary guy to be in the main event because he said, I worked so hard on my promo like Dana Brooke did. She did a hell of a promo. And all of a sudden it's like,
so hard.
It's like, hey, why is Dana Brooke having to lose to Ronda Rousey? And it's like, fuck, what the hell is this? Why is
I can tell you how to make the biggest heel and the biggest baby face in the business all at the same time. You could make the biggest heel in the business if you found a guy that looked good and fucking could work and could speak, and he came out and he said, I don't give two pisses for what anybody wants me to do. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to kick the shit out of everybody. And God damn it, well, there you go. But then he's going to become a fucking baby face because that's what people want. And I think the only way you can make a good baby face anymore is if you could find somebody that was just as likable as a human being as Mick Foley. And because that's what, apart from his talent.
Even then, people now would if he was pushed for a long time, they would then at some point would want somebody new and just go.
Well, they always want somebody new, but I think that's my biggest problem is that none of the fans can actually believe that any of the heels will go off and just and do whatever the fuck into business for themselves. And also, you could make the biggest babyface on earth, and I'm talking about a guy. If Stephanie McMahon went up and threatened him with his job and fucking tried to browbeat him, and he just grabbed Stephanie by the throat and said, "Listen, you little twat, get out of my fucking face or I'll pick my teeth with you. I don't give a fuck what you or your family wants. I'm going to do what I want. And I'm a fucking star. And if you don't want me around, I'll find some competition or make some competition and run you out of business. So leave me the fuck alone." That would make a baby face.
Did you ever see the promo with Dusty Rhodes and Stephanie McMahon?
He gave her the hand, didn't he?
He just looks like
yes.
And Dusty Rhodes was never on television again. And it was like Dusty Rhodes was not going to be at 60 whatever years old he was, because who knew better how to get over than Dusty Rhodes? Three guys in the history of the earth, right? I mean, Dusty Rhodes knew how to get over, and it's like, and he knows he ain't gonna get over if this woman is browbeating Dusty. In Dusty Rhodes' mind, who Dusty Rhodes is, this woman, even if it's Stephanie McMahon, ain't going to browbeat me and make me look like I'm just like a insignificant nothing. So he blew her off in the middle of that promo.
Yeah.
And he never got on television again because of it. But then the greatest one of all was, I love the part when it was over, was Dusty passes away and Stephanie goes, "God, I wish I could have worked more with Dusty." It's like, fuck, you cut him off. You took him off TV.
Anytime you wanted to.
Because Dusty wasn't going to follow the exact script, because he knew the character of Dusty Rhodes should not do this. You know what I mean? And he was still from that Bruiser Brody era where you look out for yourself as opposed to you're told what to do and you do not vary from it at all.
Yeah. And that's how you get over. And to use a Jim Ross, a reference that Jim Ross would probably enjoy, when's the last time you saw Maureen O'Hara tell John Wayne fucking take his muddy boots out of the fucking living room? You didn't. I'm sorry. And it's not sexist. It's just people want stars bigger than life, larger than life. If you're watching wrestling, it's not to see a bunch of well-behaved people calmly follow orders. It's to see a bunch of fucking chaos. And one more caveat, if you're not as good as you think you are, you can't get away with causing that chaos. So mind your P's and Q's. It's only for the people like Dusty who knew how to get over.
I do think to a degree with Lesnar and with Rousey, they kind of did do that. I mean, because, Ronda at the end, when she was a heel, I mean, I thought it was so fascinating because essentially, the gimmick with Ronda at the very end is like, deep, it's like deep down, you all know that Becky Lynch can't beat me. You all know it. You know what I mean? You all know it's this and that. And she, she didn't say fake, but she almost did. And the people they hated her so much because it was like, it woke them up to a certain reality. It's like, wait a minute. It's like whatever. But the key thing was when Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania is running her head into the table and goes like, you think that, I don't remember, do you think this is fake or you think this is whatever? But the wrestler got the spot back on her at the end. And in the end, Ronda got beat. So it was like it all worked out in the end. But what the fuck? What the fuck? When you're making several $1 million a year, can you not wait like 18 months, 24 months to have a baby? It's imperative right now. What the fuck? Yeah, well, that's a different story. But the thing, but with her, I mean, they did do this with her when Stephanie was doing this, was her going like, I have enough money for the rest of my life. You can't do this to me like you do to everybody else. And I thought, well, at least someone's here pretending to be a star and acting like a star would act. Like with Dusty Rhodes or Bruno Sammartino, with some authority figure come up and just go, I want you, I'm going to fire you if you don't do this and this, if you don't do this to me. And they would just go, fuck you. And that's why they would be over. they would just, punch the commissioner or whatever, right? Do whatever it was. And authority's going to tell me what to do. I'm a star. But now, it's just like Vince comes out there and they all cower to him. And, even though, Roman Reigns did punch him the other night, which, got him a pop. But, it's still that whole thing where, you portray the guys in certain ways where they don't come off like stars and they're interchangeable. And to me, that's why the live attendance is down, is because I'm not going to see Bruno Sammartino go. I'm going to see the Ice Capades, and nothing against the Ice Capades, but that's what
it's the Harlem Globetrotters B team that didn't have Metal Arc, right? We don't care who's on it. It's the Globetrotters.
Yeah. You can definitely, I can definitely feel, and when I was a kid, and then the NBA is the UFC. You know what I mean? And WWF is the Harlem Globetrotters, and the Harlem Globetrotters had their place, but it's like I would rather be the NBA, and I mean, granted, again with the TV ratings and everything, WWF WWE is doing tremendous business right now and all that too, but you could still think, you can have a little bit of both, because you and I grew up with it. We grew up with Mid-South wrestling, and it's like, to me that was like, and people go like, it wouldn't work today. Every time someone tries it, I think it does. Whenever I see someone doing it real solid, everyone's like, wow, This is really cool stuff. So, and that stuff does draw ratings. That's the thing's like, well, it won't draw ratings. Like, that's the little, or Memphis wrestling. I remember like with Bruce, and then, that stuff would never work nationally. The hell it wouldn't. We would watch those tapes from California and go, God, I wished we had wrestling like this every week.
Bruce, what can I say?
Yeah.
We just love him to death, but just don't ever believe anything that comes out of his mouth.
But throw Bruce out the equation. It's really
I actually will say this. He's still, and it's not like he's putting this public face on. He tried to defend the Red Rooster gimmick to me in 1996 when I went up there. Even when we were alone in a room, he would not just come out and say, yeah, it's fucking all stupid, but Vince wanted it. He would, oh no, it would have been a great gimmick. He just, I think maybe he was bugged. I'm not sure. I think maybe Vince had a list. But there is a mentality, and one of the problems is, and this is, unfortunately for us having seen so much of, and so much variation, I think is what it is. It's so much in so many varieties of things, and learning from so many different ways. And now everyone learns from one thing. I mean, it's like I'll talk to, and it's like, if it wasn't in WWE, if you're 25 years old, okay, you're 7 years old when ECW goes away and WCW goes away, essentially, right? Yeah.
You only know this one thing. So this is what wrestling is to you. And it's like, and there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but it's also a very narrow framework. It's one guy's vision as opposed to 30 guys' visions. And also, so it's not like it's a dumb guy. It's a smart guy, but there's other visions and there's other ways of doing it that you can come in. And I think that's one of the reasons why Heyman has been so successful there as far as manipulating and booking and creating stuff, is because he still grew up in the era we grew up in, where he's got all these ideas, plus he's a mad scientist, but he has all these ideas from all these different places and things he's seen. Whereas all the guys on the writing team, the only thing they know is WWE, and it's just so narrow in comparison.
Well, yeah, but that's the whole situation with wrestling now, is that most everybody in creative positions has only come along in the last 25 years and doesn't understand that, well, how did I stole a goddamn double cross from 1931? The way things are done changes. You do mathematics. You used to do mathematics with chalk on a blackboard, and then you did it with a fucking pencil on a pad of paper, and then you did it with goddamn laptop and a computer or whatever. Now on your fucking smartphone, but 2 + 2 still equals 4. So the methods change, but what makes sense and what gets over with the human psyche doesn't necessarily change. It's just the manner of presenting it and the way that it looks when you do.
Yeah. I mean,
well, that was profound.
Yeah. The audience is different. And all this. The audience is different. At the end of the day, they want to have fun, though. You know, I mean, that's the thing. You want to have fun. You want to see stars. You know, you go to wrestling for the same reason that you go to anything else. You want to see larger than life people. And when wrestling flourishes, it's when you got those larger than life people.
And sometimes having fun is getting mad. You want to get a little mad because you want to see the fucking little guy come back and win the fight.
It's emotional reaction. If you don't care, you don't care. The key is it's not necessarily put a smile on your face or get you mad, but making you care.
Yeah.
You know, because if you care, you know, like it's like if and sometimes this happens. It happened at WrestleMania with some of those matches. They got people to really care, and they cared who won and lost, and they were so happy. They were, you know, I mean, the emotion of like, oh, are they going to screw us? You know, and it's the Office. I don't really like that, you know, but the emotion was definitely there. They really badly wanted to see certain people win, and they did, and they were vindicated. Unfortunately, they just, you know, 7.5 hour show, which is a different problem, but,
and in 6 hours in the rain in the middle of the night, I don't know how some of those people made it through all of that.
They were so lucky.
Speaking of 7.5 hour shows.
Oh, yeah.
We got to get going. I got a day and work to do. Yeah.
Well, listen, Dave, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And, you know, once again, we have sometimes different opinions on some of the modern day activities, but I've said it before, not only nobody knows you're a savant when it comes to details and facts and figures from the past. If anybody wants to know the correct story of the Montreal or anything else, read the Observer, because you either get it right or if you get something wrong, you correct it later. People that attempt to malign your reputation are basically bullshit artists and people who are mad because you tell people that they did stupid things. But otherwise, you know, everybody has opinions, but you clearly differentiate your opinions from facts. And whereas all of my opinions are facts, so I don't really have to do that. But otherwise, hey, and thank you for keeping my secret all this time. I was still afraid that some fucking Bret Hart fan would want to fucking corral me. Bret Hart may punch me the next time he sees me. By God, our combined age is 125 now, but anyway, thank you for everything. Thank you for doing the show. Everybody subscribe to the Observer. You can still do it by mail, I think, the old way like I do, or you can get it online. And we will have you on again the next time that somebody does something fucking really stupid.
Okay. Thanks. It's a great time.
There you go. And for Brian and for Dave, thank you guys. We will see you later. Until next week on The Experience, thank you. Fuck you. Bye-bye, everybody.